Hello everyone. I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. I never believed in the idea that silence could have waited until the night I returned to the house where my brother disappeared, the house where we grew up. A creaking old thing tucked behind a thick curtain of pine trees off an abandoned logging road in northern Maine, where winters drag on like grieving mothers, and the wind seems to whisper names you'd rather forget. And though the town had long since withered, leaving behind shuttered gas stations and a diner that served the same 10 locals. Until they died off or left for warmer places, the house itself remained like a wound no one bothered to stitch. And I had left it behind when I was 17 after waking one morning to find Ben gone. Just gone. No sign of struggle. No broken windows or open doors, only his bed, neatly made, the way he always left it, and our mother sitting at the kitchen table staring at the wall as if it might offer a different outcome if she waited long enough. And when the police came, they were kind at first, but quickly settled into the rhythm of doubt, asking about fights, about arguments, about where I'd been, and why I hadn't heard anything. And I told them the truth. I'd been asleep, dreaming about walking down that logging road. Except the trees were closer together and everything was soaked in red light. But they looked at me like I was holding something back, and maybe I was, because I did hear something that night, something I've never told anyone, not even after therapy and time and distance, because it was impossible. Unreal, the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth in the attic above my room, steady, deliberate, like someone thinking with their body. And I remember holding my breath and pressing my hand against the wall to feel the vibration of movement. But when I got the courage to check the attic, there was nothing there, not even dust disturbed, so I buried it. Like we all bury things that don't fit into the shapes of what life's supposed to be, and I left the next week, never looking back, until a lawyer called me last fall to tell me my mother had passed and the house was now mine. And I almost let it go to auction, but something pulled me back. Some thread knotted in grief and guilt and the need to know. So I drove up alone in the dead of winter, headlights sweeping across frozen trees, engine groaning as if protesting the trip. And when I arrived, I half expected the house to have collapsed in on itself, but it stood as it always had, hunched and brooding. Windows like half-lidded eyes, and the moment I stepped inside I felt it, that pressure, not just of memory but of presence, like the house had been waiting for me, and everything was still in place, the old sofa, the yellowed wallpaper peeling at the corners, my mother's cross still hanging by the door as if she might return from the store at any moment, and I should have turned around then, should have burned the deed and driven south, but I didn't, because something inside me wanted to see his room again. And when I opened that door, I swear the air changed, grew colder, tighter, like something had been sleeping there and just stirred, and the room was exactly as we'd left it. Even the comic book he'd been reading still sat on the dresser. A thin layer of dust on everything except the floor, which had no dust at all, as if someone had been walking in circles around the bed, over and over. And I don't know why I did it, but I sat on the floor in the middle of that circle and listened, really listened, and I heard it again, faint, above me, in the attic, footsteps, not fast, not frantic, but slow and sure, and I told myself it was wind, old beam shifting, but I knew better, because they stopped when I moved. Started when I sat still, and I thought maybe it was some kind of residual haunting, the way trauma sticks to places, so I climbed up there with a flashlight and my pulse in my throat, opening the hatch and pulling myself into that narrow, freezing space, and the smell hit me first, earthy, sweet, wrong, and I scanned the attic, the light catching dust motes like falling ash, and in the far corner, behind an old trunk, I saw something scrawled on the wall in black crayon, dozens of times, over and over. I am still here. I am still here. I am still here. And beneath those words were hundreds of scratches in the wood, deep furrows like fingernails dragged with desperate force, and something about that corner made my skin crawl, so I backed down and tried to rationalize it. Maybe Ben had been up there before he vanished. Maybe he'd been scared of something, but why wouldn't he tell me? Why wouldn't he run? And that night I stayed in the house, telling myself I'd pack a few things and leave in the morning. But sleep never came because the pacing returned, not just in the attic but in the hallway, outside my door. And when I finally opened it, there was nothing, only silence, heavy and complete, until I turned and saw a line of muddy footprints, leading down the hall and into Ben's room, footprints that hadn't been there before. And the strange part was they were too small for a grown man, too big for a child, and they stopped at the bed, as if someone had climbed under it, and I couldn't bring myself to check. Not then. So I locked the door and sat with my back against it until morning, listening to soft breathing on the other side, rhythmic and close. And the next day I should have left. Really, I should have, but I needed answers. And I found my mother's journal in her nightstand, filled with entries that started normal and slowly spiraled into madness, talking about hearing Ben's voice at night, about something watching her through the walls, about how she couldn't sleep because it whispered when the lights went out. And her last entry was only one line: "He's not gone, just beneath." And I didn't know what that meant until I went into the basement, a place I'd always hated, with its low ceiling and dirt floor, where our father used to keep old tools and where we played when we were too young to know fear. And I saw that the far wall had been disturbed, bricks pulled out and stacked neatly, like someone had made a doorway and sealed it again. And I spent the next hour digging through the cold earth, fingers numb, nails split, until I found it, a wooden hatch I didn't remember ever seeing. And when I pried it open, a gust of air escaped that smelled like rot and copper and old rain. And I lowered myself into the dark with only a headlamp and a length of rope, descending into a tunnel that sloped deeper than any root cellar should, the walls narrowing, the air growing thick and wet, until I emerged into a chamber I cannot fully describe, a room carved from the rock itself, filled with bones arranged in circles, small bones, human, and in the center was a bed, a child's bed, clean and white and perfectly made, and sitting on it was Ben, or what looked like Ben, except his eyes were entirely black and he didn't blink and his mouth didn't move when he said my name. And I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't, because my legs stopped working, and he told me he had never left, that the house took him, that something beneath the ground had whispered to him through the floorboards for years until he finally listened, and it showed him things, fed him things, and now he was part of it, and I would be too, because we shared the same blood. And the last thing I remember is that thing wearing my brother's face, standing up and reaching toward me with hands that were far too long, fingers jointed in the wrong places. And then I woke up in the living room. 2 days later, the hatch gone, the wall sealed, and I left that day, didn't tell anyone. Didn't write it down until now, but every night since then I've heard footsteps above me no matter where I am, even in the city, even on the 10th floor of a new building. And sometimes I wake up to find muddy prints around my bed. And last night, I heard breathing right behind me, and when I looked in the mirror, I swear for a second it wasn't my reflection looking back. Story 2. I never told anyone what really happened that summer because I don't think anyone would believe me, and to be honest, I've spent years trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare or a breakdown or some psychological short circuit triggered by heat and stress and loneliness, but the truth is I remember it all too clearly, and I've come to accept that either I went completely mad or something impossibly real and evil happened in that house. The house I rented after my divorce, when I thought getting away from the city would help clear my head and maybe let me start over. It was a 2-story Victorian in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by wheat fields and distant barns, the kind of place people drive past without noticing, with peeling green paint, wind chimes that never stopped ringing, and a porch that sagged under its own weight. And I got it for cheap because it had been empty for years, and the real estate agent wouldn't say why, just gave me this tight smile and said the last tenant left suddenly, which didn't faze me because I was too numb at the time to care about haunted house cliches or rural myths. I just needed quiet and space to breathe. But the quiet was the first thing that began to feel wrong. Not peaceful quiet, but a dead, heavy stillness that pressed on you the longer you stayed in it, like the air itself was listening, waiting, holding its breath. And after the first week I began to hear noises at night, subtle things at first like the floor creaking, when no one was walking on it, or the soft click of the front door unlocking by itself around 3 a.m. even though I'd bolted it shut. And I kept telling myself it was the house settling or bad wiring, or maybe I was still too keyed up from the divorce to relax. But then I started finding things moved, not stolen, just moved, like my toothbrush on the kitchen table, or my wallet in the bathtub, or the TV remote inside the fridge. And there were carvings in the walls that I hadn't noticed before. Tiny. Gouges like something had scratched its way up the staircase. But the thing that made me start keeping a knife under my pillow was the child's voice, high and thin and too close, whispering from inside the walls, calling me by name, always at the same time every night, 3:15. And sometimes it would laugh. And it wasn't the laughter of a child who was happy. It was the laugh of something pretending to be a child, something that didn't know how joy worked but had learned how to mimic it. Like a sound through broken speakers. And I stopped sleeping after that. I just sat in the living room with all the lights on and the knife in my hand, staring at the staircase where the shadows moved even when nothing else did. And one night I saw something peek around the corner at the top of the stairs, just the top half of a face, pale and grinning, with black holes where eyes should have been and teeth that were too many and too small, and it ducked out of sight before I could stand up. And I remember running out of the house barefoot, blood on my arms from where my fingernails had broken the skin without me noticing, and I spent the night in my car parked by the side of the road, shaking and trying to convince myself I'd imagined it, that it was stress, sleep deprivation, anything but real. But I knew it was real. I knew something was in that house and it wanted me to stay, not to kill me. No, that would have been a mercy. It wanted to keep me and wear me down and feed on whatever I was before, until I became part of it, like the walls and the rot and the dust. And I almost left for good then, but something made me go back the next day. Maybe curiosity, maybe pride. Maybe something in me had already been claimed and I didn't know it yet. But when I went inside, it was like the house had changed, like the layout was different in subtle ways. Doors led to places they hadn't before. Windows looked out onto blackness instead of wheat fields, and the furniture was wrong. Warped, taller or shorter than it had been. And when I went into the basement, which I had avoided until then, I found something that should not have been there, a room that looked like a child's bedroom, but ancient. Like it had been built and buried and forgotten for decades, filled with old toys that looked handmade and wrong, stitched together with animal bones and twine, and on the wall were hundreds of handprints in ash, all child-sized, except for one that was the size of mine. And when I turned to leave, I saw writing on the floor I hadn't noticed before, a single phrase scratched over and over into the concrete. You came back, you came back, you came back. And I ran then. I don't remember reaching the stairs or the front door or even my car. I just remember getting to the highway and not stopping until I crossed state lines. And I never went back, never collected my things, never spoke to the landlord or explained anything. I just disappeared from that place like the tenant before me. But the thing is, it didn't stop there, because whatever was in that house followed me, maybe not physically, but in dreams, in mirrors, in the way my apartment sometimes goes completely silent at night, even in the middle of the city, or how I hear scratching under my bed at the exact same time every night, or how once in a while, when I pass by reflective surfaces, I don't see myself looking back, and I can still hear the voice sometimes, still whispering, still calling me by name, still laughing that broken laugh, and I know it's just waiting for me to forget, waiting for me to sleep, waiting for the day I lose just enough of myself that I go back, because I dream about that house now. I dream about those stairs and the pale face and the toys made of bones and the handprints and the knife under my pillow. And each time I wake up, it takes me a few seconds to remember where I am, to remember I got away, and lately that takes longer and longer. Like something is pulling me back, like I'm unraveling thread by thread, and someday soon I won't wake up at all, and I'll just be there again, in that house, in that room, in the walls, whispering someone else's name. Story 3. It started with the scratching behind the walls at night, soft at first like a mouse or a squirrel, something harmless, something small. But over time it changed, deepened, grew deliberate, like fingers, not claws, and not random. Either it came in a pattern, slow, steady, measured, like someone was counting slowly while they dragged their nails across the inside of the drywall. And I didn't tell anyone at first because I just moved in and I thought maybe I was just hearing the building settle, or the neighbors, or even something in the pipes. But then I started noticing other things that didn't make sense, like how every morning I'd wake up and find the picture frames on my wall tilted exactly 23 degrees to the left, or how my toothbrush would be wet even when I hadn't used it, or how my bedroom door would be cracked open even though I locked it every night. And at first I tried to laugh it off, but it kept happening, and it was always these small, unsettling changes, as if something wanted me to know it was there, but didn't want me to see it not yet. And I started recording audio at night, just in case. And the first few nights I heard nothing but static and silence. But then on the fourth night, there was something else, just a faint breathing sound like someone sleeping right next to the recorder. And I lived alone, I always had. And that's when I started to unravel, because either someone was coming into my apartment at night and standing over me while I slept, or there was something already there, something I couldn't see, and I became obsessed with trying to figure it out. I stayed up late watching the shadows, trying to see if anything moved when I wasn't looking, and I set up cameras and motion sensors, and even sprinkled baby powder on the floor to catch footprints, but nothing ever triggered the cameras, nothing moved the sensors, and nothing left a trace in the powder except once, and that one time I woke up and saw that something had written in the powder with a finger the word soon, all in capital letters, and I should have left then, should have packed my things and gotten far away, but I didn't because I needed to know, and I started researching the building, trying to find any history, anything that could explain what was happening, and I found an article buried in the local newspaper archives about a tenant who went missing 10 years ago in my exact unit. No signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle, just vanished, and the landlord refused to comment, and the article said the only thing left behind was a single handprint on the inside of the bathroom mirror. And when I read that, I felt the air in my apartment shift grow heavier, and I ran to my bathroom and wiped the fog from the mirror, and there it was, faint but visible, a smudged handprint, too large for me, too long, in the fingers pressed against the glass from the inside. And that night, I didn't sleep, I just sat in my bed holding a flashlight and trying not to blink, and that's when I heard the voice, not loud, not angry, just curious, like a child who didn't understand what they were seeing, and it whispered my name once, twice, then giggled and said, "You're mine now." And the light flickered and the temperature dropped, and I saw my breath, even though it was summer, and I felt something pressed down on the edge of the bed, something cold, something wet. And when I turned my head, there was nothing there, but the indent was still in the mattress, and I screamed and ran from the apartment and spent the night in my car. And the next morning, I tried to tell someone, anyone, but the words felt heavy and wrong, like whatever was in that apartment didn't want me to speak about it, didn't want to be known. And every time I tried to explain, I started to choke or lose my train of thought or forget what I was saying. And I could see in their eyes they thought I was crazy, and maybe I was, but I know what I experienced, and I know that when I went back one last time to grab my things, I found the walls covered in writing, dozens, maybe hundreds of messages scrawled in charcoal or ash, or something darker, messages like, "You belong here and never alone," and it watches through the cracks. And in the center of the living room floor was a small pile of teeth, not mine, not human, just there like an offering or a warning. And that's when I left for good, left everything and never looked back. And I moved across the country and changed my name and tried to forget, but it didn't stop, because now wherever I go I hear the scratching again, behind walls, behind doors and ceilings and floors. And even when I sleep in hotel rooms or friends' couches or places I've never been before, and I wake up to the picture frames tilted and the toothbrush wet, and once I found soon written in steam on a mirror in a city I had just arrived in, and I don't know how far this thing reaches or what it really wants, but I know it marked me that night, and I know it follows me, and I know that no matter how fast I run or how far I move, or how deeply I bury the memory, it is always there, just beneath the surface, waiting, watching, scratching, and it is patient, so horribly patient, and every night it gets a little closer, And every morning I wake up with just one more thing out of place, one more breath. I didn't take one more shadow I didn't cast. And I know that soon, maybe even tonight, I'll open my eyes and it'll be there standing over me, and it will smile and say my name again, and I won't be able to scream or move or look away, because by then it'll already be too late. Story 4. It began the night I stayed late at the library, not the kind with computers and kids doing homework, but the old brick one on the edge of town that smells like mildew and varnish, and where the light never quite reaches the corners, and the books are older than anyone who works there, and some of them don't have titles or authors or even words, just long pages of symbols that move when you look at them too long. And I wasn't supposed to be there after dark, but I'd lost track of time researching a thesis on historical occult practices in rural communities, and I thought maybe I'd find something buried in the local records, something strange or lost, or maybe just misunderstood. And the librarian, an old woman with skin like yellowed parchment and eyes that didn't blink, told me I could stay if I didn't mind the company, and I thought she meant her, but she didn't. She meant something else, something that made the walls groan as the sun went down and the air shift as if the entire building was breathing, and I was too tired to care at first, too focused on the brittle pages in front of me to notice the way the lights dimmed one by one, even though no one turned them off, and the way the books whispered to each other in a language made of dust and teeth and things that lived between the lines. And when I finally did look up, I was alone, not just alone like no one was around, but alone like the whole world had gone quiet, and still like I had fallen into a crack between hours and was now sitting inside a place that wasn't quite part of the living. And I stood up, and the silence cracked like glass beneath my feet, and I heard footsteps upstairs, slow and heavy and dragging, and I called out thinking maybe the librarian was checking on me, but no one answered, and the footsteps stopped. And then the breathing began from all around me, from behind the shelves and under the floor and above the ceiling, as if the library had turned into a giant chest, rising and falling with something that dreamed in languages older than sound. And I backed away toward the front desk, but it wasn't there anymore, or maybe I had moved, or maybe the building had changed shape when I wasn't looking, and the books began to move, not fall or fly, but crawl, inching off their shelves like insects with paper wings and spines that cracked like knuckles. And I turned to run, but the aisles stretched longer than they had before, and the lights flickered and revealed shadows that didn't belong to anything I could see. And one of them reached for me with fingers made of letters that had been cut from forgotten languages, and I felt them brush against my skin, and they were cold and wet and full of memory. And for a second I saw something, not with my eyes, but in my mind, a vast black library beneath the earth, built of bone and silence, and filled with books that screamed when opened. And I saw myself walking there barefoot and blind, holding a candle that dripped black wax that whispered my name. And then I blinked, and I was back and running, and the shelves blurred past me, but they were wrong. The books had no titles, now only eyes blinking and unblinking, and some of them followed me with hunger and some with pity. And I heard the librarian laugh, but it wasn't a human sound, it was dry and hollow and full of pages being torn from something alive. And I reached the main doors, and they were gone, replaced by a wall of shelves that stretched higher than I could see, and the books began to hum louder and louder, until the sound became pressure behind my eyes, and I screamed, and the scream echoed wrong, like it had been said before, like I had just joined a chorus of others who had screamed the same scream in the same place at the same moment, trapped in a loop. And I fell, and when I hit the floor, it wasn't carpet or tile, but something soft and pulsing like the tongue of some sleeping god. And I stood up, and there was a book open in front of me with my name written over and over in a spiral that grew tighter and smaller until it became a dot, and the dot became a hole, and I felt myself falling into it. And I woke up at my apartment on the floor, gasping, with blood coming from my ears, and my fingernails cracked and blackened like I had clawed my way through something burning. And I thought maybe I'd had a seizure or a nightmare or a breakdown, but when I checked my bag, there was a book in it, one I hadn't taken, one that looked like skin stretched over wood, and it was warm, and it whispered when I touched it. And I tried to burn it, but the fire went out. I tried to bury it, but the ground rejected it. I tried to throw it in the river, but it washed up on my doorstep the next morning, dry and humming. And I started to dream of the library every night, walking its endless halls, chased by things that looked like men but weren't, with mouths full of bookmarks and eyes made of mirrors. And I could feel myself changing, waking up with words carved into my arms in ink I couldn't wash off, and hearing whispers in The faucet and the fridge and the walls, and they all said the same thing: you read and now you're written. And I don't sleep anymore because when I do, I write in my dreams, and the writing appears on the walls in my waking life, and some of the words I don't understand and some I do, and they're names of people I've never met who die the next day, and the police have come 3 times, but they never stay long and they never come back, and now my skin is thin and pale and smells of dust, and I feel the shelves growing inside me, bones creaking like spines opening, and I know I'm becoming something else, something that remembers too much and has no mouth for forgetting, and I hear the librarian's voice sometimes behind the mirror or in the static between songs, and she tells me I'm almost ready, that soon the book will open and I will fall inside and become a chapter or a sentence or just a word screaming in silence waiting for someone else to read me. Story 5. It began when I moved into the old house at the edge of a forgotten town that barely showed up on any map, a place people passed through but never stopped, in a place where street signs were sun-faded and bent, and windows had more boards than glass, and the trees leaned too far over the roads like they were listening, and I had no reason to be there except that the house was cheap, and I was desperate, and sometimes desperation sounds a lot like courage when you lie to yourself enough, so I took them. Keys from a silent man who didn't speak and whose hands trembled when he passed them to me like he was trying to give away something poisonous, and the house was wrong from the beginning, not in the way most old houses are, not creaky floors or faulty wiring, but in the way that the shadows didn't move when the light did, and the corners seemed deeper than they should be, and there was one door upstairs that didn't open no matter how hard I turned the knob or pushed or even kicked, and I told myself it was just old or warped from the rain, but I caught myself staring at it at night, listening to something faint behind it, a shuffling like someone dragging themselves across the floor slowly as if waiting for me to knock so they could knock back, and the walls had patterns in them. Faint things you couldn't see at first, but once you noticed them they never disappeared, like someone had pressed their hands all over the drywall over and over again with fingers too long and space too close, and the basement was the worst, always cold, always wet, and filled with the smell of rot even when there was nothing down there but dust and a broken washing machine, and once I found a bone, just one small enough to be a child's, and I told myself it was probably from an animal, because the alternative was too much, and I stopped going down there. And then the dreams began, dreams of drowning in a room filled with black water while something just under the surface whispered my name over and over, and I'd wake up choking on nothing, and my sheets soaked through with sweat and once with blood, and when I looked in the mirror the next morning I saw fingerprints on my throat, bruises too wide to be human, and I began hearing things during the day too, not just creaks or groans but voices echoing from empty rooms, calling out in strange accents, or sometimes saying things I'd been thinking before I said them, like the house was reading my thoughts and answering them, and my phone started recording on its own, sometimes capturing low growls or footsteps, and once a voice that said clear as day, "You're not alone." And I tried to leave once, packed my car and drove until I couldn't see the house anymore, but somehow the road looped me back, and I ended up in front of it again, like it had followed me, like it had pulled the roads around it tighter to keep me close, and every time I stepped outside, the wind would push against me hard like fingers on my chest, keeping me in place, and the neighbors wouldn't speak to me, not really, just stared and shut their doors when I walked by, and once I caught one of them digging in their yard in the middle of the night and burying something wrapped in black cloth, and when they saw me they smiled, but it wasn't a real smile, it was too wide, too flat, like they were wearing a mask. And then I started losing time, waking up in different rooms with no memory of walking there, sometimes holding things I didn't own, like a rusted key or a small porcelain doll with eyes that looked too real. And once I woke up outside the locked door upstairs, and this time it was open just a crack, and from inside came the sound of wet breathing, and I slammed it shut and dragged a dresser in front of it, and it stayed closed for a while until the banging started, slow and rhythmic like a heartbeat, and the banging didn't stop for days, and every time it hit the walls the lights flickered and the air turned thick, and I stopped sleeping altogether. And when I finally called someone to come help, the phone only rang once before going dead, and when I tried again the voice on the other end wasn't mine, but it had my voice, and it said, "You shouldn't have opened it," even though I hadn't, and I began to see things in the mirror's reflections that didn't match my movements or stood behind me and vanished when I turned around, and my reflection began to smile when I didn't, and sometimes it moved when I didn't, and I knew then that Whatever was in the house wasn't just haunting, it was watching, learning, copying, and it wanted out. And one night the door upstairs burst open on its own, and something stepped out, not fast, not sudden, just slow and inevitable, like water rising through a crack. And it wasn't a person, not really, just the shape of one, tall and thin, and wrapped in shadows with no face, just a place where a face should be. And it didn't walk, it floated, dragging something behind it that clicked and snapped like bones, and wherever it went the walls turned black and the paint peeled and the windows cracked. And I hid in the closet like a child, like that would help. And I heard it pass by the door, breathing heavy and wet, and it whispered to me again, this time clearer, and it said, "You brought me back." And I didn't know what it meant until I remembered the books I had found in the attic, books filled with symbols and drawings and rituals written in a language that made my eyes bleed if I stared too long. And I had read them out loud once, laughing like a fool, like a drunk, calling into the void for a dare. And now the void had answered, and I tried to burn them, but the flames turned blue, and the book screamed. And when I closed the oven door to trap the fire inside, I could hear something laughing from behind the walls, and every night since then it comes closer. I hear it climbing the stairs even though there's no sound, and yet I feel the weight of it on the steps. And every morning I find something new, something left for me, a tooth, a lock of hair, a scrap of skin. And now the mirrors don't show me anymore, they show it standing where I should be, smiling with my smile and blinking with my eyes. And every time I blink it stays looking, and sometimes now I think I'm the reflection and it's the real one. And I don't know when that happened, and the townspeople still don't speak, but now they watch and nod like they knew all along that the house would choose me. And they whisper when I walk by, and I can feel the ground shifting beneath me, like it's breathing with me, like the house has made a home of my bones. And one night I won't wake up in my bed, I'll wake up behind the door upstairs, and I'll be the one whispering, and someone else will move in and hear the scratching, and the door will stay closed until they knock, and I'll knock back, and the house will remember and feed and grow and begin again. Story 6. It started on the third night after I took the job at the long-abandoned observatory on Black Hollow Ridge, a place so far from town that the road to it doesn't appear on GPS, and the forest grows thick and dark like it's trying to reclaim the concrete and stone. And no one had worked there for almost 30 years, not since the fire that killed the last team, the ones whose names have been scrubbed from every record, whose photos were burned, whose families never spoke publicly. And yet the building still stood wrapped in vines and rot like something trying to hide a wound. And I took the job because I was broke and needed space, and the idea of spending a few months alone cataloging old data and sleeping above the tree lean sounded peaceful. But the place was wrong the moment I arrived, not just the usual decay or the way the main dish still turned to track stars that hadn't existed for decades, but the way the building seemed to sigh and twitch at the edge of hearing, like an animal asleep but dreaming badly. And the wind never blew in the same direction twice, and sometimes it didn't blow at all, even when the trees moved. And the sky over the ridge was always just a little too dark, as if light bent differently here, and the stars looked unfamiliar and far too many and far too close. And the computers still worked even after 30 years of disuse, but the data they displayed wasn't right. It wasn't radio signals or star maps or telescope readouts. It was sequences of numbers that repeated and grew and twisted into symbols I didn't understand. And when I printed one of the logs, my nose started bleeding and my left eye blurred for 2 hours. And I dreamed that night of something vast and silent crouched behind the stars, pressing its face close to the atmosphere, whispering, and pulses of static and lightning. And I woke up with burn marks on my wrists, like something had grabbed me and held tight. And outside the fog rolled in off the ridge and didn't leave for 3 days, and I could hear things moving in it, heavy and slow. And once I saw a shape that was taller than the trees, with arms that dragged behind it, and it looked right at me, though it had no face, just folds of skin and mouths opening silently across its chest and stomach. And I should have left. I should have taken the service truck and barreled down the hill, but every time I reached the road it was gone, covered in moss and roots, as if it had never existed. And the compass spun and the map glitched, and I knew then the observatory wasn't in the same place anymore. Not exactly. It had slipped or been pulled, or maybe I had. And I started finding photographs inside the drawers in the office, black and white and curling at the edges, of people I didn't recognize with their eyes scratched out, and the date always read 1966, even though the building wasn't constructed until 1985, and sometimes the photos changed when I blinked. Sometimes the people turned their heads or stood closer than before, and one night I woke to find all the photos laid out on the floor around my bed in a perfect circle, and each one now showed me standing in the background behind the missing people and always staring, and I started seeing reflections in the observatory glass of things that weren't their shapes in lab. Coats with their faces too long and thin, and eyes where their mouth should be, and hands made of too many fingers. And I would turn, but nothing would be behind me, and the telescope refused to aim at anything but one part of the sky just above the ridge, and no matter how I adjusted the controls, it swung back as if something was calling it. And sometimes I could hear music from inside the dish, soft and low and full of static like a radio station from a dead planet, and the sound made my teeth itch and my vision swim, and I wrote down what I heard, but the words made no sense until I realized they were in my handwriting from a journal I hadn't written yet, describing things I hadn't seen yet. And one night I went up to the telescope room and found the floor covered in dirt and ash and small footprints like a child had walked in circles for hours. And when I tried to sweep it up, the broom passed through it like it wasn't there, and I saw something crouched behind the dish, hunched and whispering in a voice that sounded like my mother's, even though she's been dead for 5 years. And it said my name again and again, each time a little less human. And I ran downstairs and found the power flickering and the screens flashing with images of a place I've never seen, a city made of bones and towers that breathed, and streets where people moved like puppets on invisible strings, and the cameras were pointed at me even though I hadn't activated them, and I was on every screen standing in different poses, some asleep, some smiling, some screaming. And then the power went out and I heard footsteps from above, not human ones, something dragging and clicking and heavy like hooves on tile, and I locked the doors, but they opened anyway, not all at once, but slowly, like something was testing me. And when I barricaded myself in the basement, I found carvings on the walls, thousands of them etched deep into the concrete, spirals and eyes and jagged mouths, all pointing to the center of the floor, where the concrete had been peeled away, and beneath it was a pit, and I don't know how deep it went, but it breathed. And when I looked down, I saw my own face looking up and smiling and mouthing the words soon, and I heard the footsteps again, this time inside the room, though the door was still shut, and I screamed and passed out. And when I woke up, it was morning, and everything looked normal except the pit was gone and the walls were clean, but the carvings were now under my skin, faint and red like fresh tattoos, and they moved when I stared too long, and the observatory no longer showed up on satellite images or maps, and I haven't seen another person in weeks, and the food doesn't rot, and the clocks spin backward, and the stars have changed again. They're spelling something out across the sky, and I can almost read it, and the music plays constantly now, but I can't tell if it's outside or inside me, and sometimes I see versions of myself wandering the halls, silent and thin and smiling, and one of them sits outside the telescope room carving the word return into the wall over and over, and another one stares into the sky with eyes that no longer blink. And I know I should be scared, but the longer I stay, the more the fear fades, replaced by something colder and heavier, like something is pressing itself into my thoughts and rearranging them. And last night I walked outside and the fog parted for me and the stars opened, and I saw it not fully but enough, something vast and endless hanging just outside reality, with limbs like shadows and eyes that burn, and a mouth that's always open, and inside that mouth I saw the city again and myself standing at its center. And I understood that the observatory was never meant to watch the stars, it was meant to hold something back, and someone let it go, and now it's leaking through. And I think maybe it was always me, maybe I was always supposed to come here and finish what they started, and I hear it now. Even when I'm not awake, it sings to me in sleep and in silence, and sometimes when I speak, it's not my voice. And I think soon I'll forget how to leave, how to want to leave, and the door to the dish room is always open now, and the stars are so close, and I'm not sure which version of me is writing this, or if I ever left at all, or if you're just reading something I wrote in another life or another loop, because the walls are thin here and the echoes run deep. And if you find this, if you feel the pull, do not come up the ridge, do not look into the dish, do not answer when it calls your name. Story 7. I never should have taken the night shift at the archival wing of the state asylum, not because the pay was bad or the hours long, but because the job came with rules that didn't make sense and silences that stretched longer than they should have. And the first time I stepped into that cold, sterile building, I felt something watching me from behind the walls. Not in the metaphorical way people say when a place feels spooky, but truly watching, like there were eyes embedded deep in the plaster and cement, and they weren't just observing but memorizing. And my job was simple on paper: organize the old records, digitize the patient files, and most importantly, stay out of the locked basement marked Ward 6. Though it hadn't been in use since the 1970s after a fire and an outbreak and something else no one ever clarified. But the doors remained bolted with thick rusted chains and a keypad that had long since lost power, and every hallway seemed to slant toward that part of the building like the entire foundation was being pulled downward, like gravity itself bent toward that sealed section. And every now and then I'd hear the door handles rattle, and I told myself it was just airflow or mice, but mice don't whisper in voices that sound like mine. And the deeper I went into the old files, the more I began to see patterns, not just in patient symptoms, but in their drawings and journal entries, and even in the medical reports written by different doctors over decades and in different languages. Always the same symbol scratched somewhere in the margins, a circle with jagged lines radiating outward like a sun made of teeth. And at first, I thought it was coincidence until I found that symbol carved beneath my desk in fresh gouges that hadn't been there before. And sometimes the files rearranged themselves overnight as if someone or something was studying them too. And once I caught my reflection in the glass window of the administrator's office long after everyone else had gone home, and it blinked after I did. It smiled just a little too wide, and I stopped looking at mirrors after that because I realized whatever it wasn't just copying me, it was practicing, learning, refining, and then came the dreams. At first scattered and strange, but soon they all took place in the same long hallway I'd never seen but felt I knew intimately, with flickering lights and peeling walls and doors that opened into impossible spaces like a staircase that spiraled down through centuries, or a room filled with identical versions of myself, all facing the wall and humming tunelessly. And when I woke up one morning with dirt under my nails and my shoes soaked with stagnant water, I knew I hadn't just been dreaming. And the next night, I found the entrance to Ward 6 unlocked, the keypad screen glowing green for the first time since I'd arrived, and the chains slithering across the floor like they'd been pulled from the inside. And something in me said to run, but something louder said to enter. And the air inside was thick and wet and smelled like mold and copper and something else, something sweet and rotting like fruit left too long in the sun. And the walls were darker than they should have been. Not just with grime, but as if they absorbed light instead of reflecting it. And there were handprints everywhere, some far too small and some far too large. And as I moved deeper, I started to see the outlines of faces pressed into the walls, mouths open in silent screams and eyes wide and slick as if still moist. And one of them moved, just a twitch, just enough to let me know they were still aware, still watching. And the records here were different, bound in flesh-colored folders with entries written in red ink that smelled like pennies. And I recognized my name listed several times as a patient, dated decades before I was born, each describing episodes I'd never experienced. And the further I read, the more I began to remember them, like the act of reading pulled the memory forward from wherever it had been buried. And I found a file labeled Final Copy with my handwriting on the cover, even though I'd never seen it before. And inside were descriptions of things I hadn't done yet: unlocking doors, descending staircases, reading words not meant for human minds, and at the bottom a single note scrawled across the page that read, "Once you know, it knows you." And I dropped the folder and ran, or tried to, but the hallway had changed. Behind me, bending and twisting and filling with water that rose too quickly and was too cold, and in the water floated pieces of myself, fingernails, a tooth, my own left eye blinking at me. And then came the music, soft and slow, and played backward, like a lullaby for the dead. And I heard the footsteps not just behind me but above and below and beside, coming from every direction. And I screamed, but the sound came out backwards, like a tape being rewound. And when I found the stairs, they went down instead of up, and the walls were covered in skin, pulsing slightly as if breathing. And at the bottom was a room with no walls, just an expanse of mirrors reflecting versions of me I never wanted to see, dead me, burning me, laughing me with teeth like needles and eyes made of static. And one of them stepped forward through the mirror into the world and took my place, and I watched myself leave, smiling, while I remained trapped behind the glass, screaming soundlessly as the light above flickered and died. And now I live inside the reflections, watching others pass by, trying to warn them, but I can't speak, only mimic, only smile, only wait. And sometimes I see him, my other self, the one who walked out, as he passes by shiny windows and polished metal, and I try to scream, but he just looks into the glass and smiles and whispers something I can't hear and walks on. And each day I feel myself changing, growing hungrier, colder, less human, more like them. And I know soon I'll stop, remembering who I was, stop caring about escape, and begin waiting for someone else to stare too long into the wrong mirror at the wrong moment and open the door again, because the reflections are always watching, always waiting. And all it takes is a second of weakness for them to reach through and take what they need to be real again. Story 8. I think the worst part wasn't the screaming or the blood or the thing that waited in the stairwell with a voice like dry leaves scraping together and a mouth that opened wider than its head should allow. No, the worst part was realizing it had followed me home. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started when I took the job clearing out the old Godfrey Institute on the edge of town, a stone building swallowed by trees and silence, shut down after a chemical leak and several patient disappearances, or so the paperwork said. But the deeper I went into the files, the less things made sense. Dates that didn't line up, patients whose names didn't exist in any census, doctors who signed their names in sigils rather than letters. And there were things left behind that no one had touched in decades. Dolls with mouths sewn shut, journals written in mirror script, tape reels labeled "Do Not Play," and a smell in the basement that no one could explain, something like wet rust and something dying, but not dead yet, something breathing slowly and painfully under the concrete. And on my third day, I found a door that shouldn't have been there. A metal hatch under a rotten rug in the corner of the sub-basement. No record of it in blueprints. No lock. Just a small handprint and the number 6 etched into the handle. And I stared at it for almost an hour, heart pounding like I was standing on the edge of a cliff and the wind was whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. And eventually I opened it. Of course I did. Curiosity is a blade that cuts both ways. And the stairs below were cold and slick with condensation and got narrower the further I went, until I had to press sideways to fit. And when I reached the bottom, the space opened into a corridor that didn't belong to any building built by human hands. Too wide, too tall. The walls made of a black stone that shimmered slightly like it was wet, even though my fingertips came back dry, and it was warm down there, pulsing warm like a mouth. And the lights weren't lights, but things growing from the ceiling that glowed pale yellow and clicked faintly when I got close, like they were sensing me, like they were awake. And the silence was thick and full, not empty, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something waiting, listening, breathing in the rhythm of my own chest. And I walked because I couldn't not walk, like something had hooked its fingers behind my heart and was pulling. And eventually I reached the chamber, a circular room with no doors but the one behind me, though when I turned around it was gone. Just black stone and the shimmer of something written into the grain. And in the center of the room was a chair, old and cracked and stained with something dark, and strapped to the chair was a body that wasn't dead and wasn't alive, its chest rising in slow, ragged breaths, its eyes sealed shut with wire, its mouth sewn closed with teeth pushed in upside down. And I swear to you, I didn't move, but suddenly I was standing over it, hand outstretched, fingers inches from its face. And as soon as my skin touched it, I felt the thing open its mind into mine like a clawed hand prying open my skull. And I saw every person who had ever sat in that chair, heard their screams inside my head, saw their memories flooding into me, burning and cold and full of voices that spoke in a language not meant for ears, a language meant to be felt in bone. And when I woke up, I was outside the institute in my car, engine running. 3 hours had passed. My clothes soaked in something black and sticky, my mouth filled with dirt and the taste of iron. And when I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, my eyes didn't blink, not right away, just stared back at me like something had gotten behind them. And when I got home, I tried to forget. I really did. I trashed the research notes, quit the job, scrubbed my skin until it bled. But the whispers didn't stop. Not ever. They came. Through the vents and the drains and the seams in the walls. And at night, I'd wake up with bruises in the shape of fingers I didn't remember. And once I found a handprint on my bathroom mirror that was too small to be mine and too high to belong to anyone I knew. And the bruises got deeper, and the sleep came less and less, and sometimes I'd catch myself writing in that same backward script from the journals. Whole paragraphs carved into my desk or scrawled in soap across the walls, and worse. Then the writing were the gaps, the missing time, like 2 hours in the bathtub with the water cold and dark and my eyes wide open, not blinking, or 6 hours walking through the woods barefoot with something clutched in my hand. A tooth, not mine, not human, and I started seeing them. The others, reflections in windows of faces that were almost mine, but not quite, smiling too wide, tilting their heads too far, and always watching, never blinking. And I kept the lights on, but that didn't stop. Nothing stops them once you open the door, once you see, because seeing isn't passive. It's a contract, an invitation, and now I know what that room was, what the chair was for. It was a place of opening, of letting in, and I wasn't the first, won't be the last, and whatever I brought back with me has learned how to wear me like a costume. How to smile with my teeth and speak in my voice and trick the world into believing I'm still here. But I'm not. Not really. I'm buried somewhere under the floor of that place, in the dark between the cracks, screaming without a mouth, while the thing in my skin walks around learning, adapting, whispering into the ears of anyone who gets too close. And I see it sometimes in footage of myself, moving just slightly out of sync, blinking at the wrong time, smiling when nothing is funny, and no one believes me when I tell them. No one sees it but me. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the trick. Because the moment you understand it's real, that's when it can reach you. That's when the whispers start. That's when the dreams get teeth. And the next time you find a door where no door should be, don't open it. Don't go down. Don't listen. Because the chair is still there, and the body is still breathing. And it's waiting for someone to come back and finish what I started. Someone like you. Story 9. I don't know what convinced me to move into that old farmhouse on the edge of nowhere. Maybe it was the price. Maybe it was the desperate need to get away from the noise and hurt of the city after what happened with my brother. Maybe I just needed to feel like I could breathe again without seeing 100 windows staring back at me. But the moment I stepped across the threshold of that place, I felt something shift in my stomach. Not like nerves or even fear, more like a deep lurching. Recognition, like my body remembered something I didn't, like it had already been there before. And for the first few days it was just quiet and heavy with dust, the kind that clings to your skin no matter how much you clean. And I figured it was just the age of the place, or maybe the way the wind moved through the crooked hallways at night, making the doors creak and the floor groan like it was struggling to hold a secret. But then I started noticing the smell, not constant, just flashes of it. Wet soil and rust and something that reminded me of rotting flowers, and it always came strongest from the cellar door, which had been nailed shut before I arrived and which I had no reason to open, except it kept bothering me, like a splinter in my thoughts. And every night it seemed like the smell got stronger, not all the time, just when I was trying to sleep. And sometimes I could hear something, too. Nothing loud, just a dragging sound, slow and irregular, like something without bones, trying to move across the stone floor below me, and I told myself it was probably just an old furnace or rats or maybe my own mind trying to sabotage the peace I thought I wanted. But then I started dreaming, and the dreams were the same every night. Dark halls, dripping walls, a voice whispering in a language I didn't know but somehow understood, and something watching me from just behind my shoulder, never moving, just waiting, and I'd wake up gasping and sweating with the cellar door creaking softly downstairs like it was breathing in the dark, and I should have left. I should have packed up and driven away without looking back, but I didn't, because something about the place held me, not like a home holds you, but like a hook does, deep under the skin. And when the scratching started, I stopped pretending it was all in my head, soft at first, like fingernails on the other side of the wall, then louder, more desperate, like something trying to get out or in, and it wasn't just at night anymore. I'd hear it when I was cooking, when I was showering, even when I was out in the yard, and once I thought I saw something pressed against the cellar window from the outside, not a face exactly, more like a mass of skin and teeth and eyes all looking in different directions, and I ran back inside and slammed the door, but when I looked again it was gone, and still I stayed, and I started locking my bedroom door at night and pushing furniture in front of it, which made no sense, since whatever was in the cellar had never come upstairs, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was learning how, like it was evolving into something smarter. And then came the night the power went out and my phone wouldn't turn on, and every flashlight I had just clicked uselessly in my hand. And I lit candles like a scared kid and sat in the middle of the kitchen floor, trying not to breathe too loud, trying not to think about how the cellar door was open just a crack now, just wide enough for something thin to squeeze through. And the smell was everywhere, stronger than ever, so thick it felt alive, and I saw the scratch marks along the floorboards, clawed in long arcs from the stairs to the doorway, and I could hear something wet slapping against the steps. Getting closer, not running, not rushing, just steady and sure, and I wanted to scream, but something about the air made it feel like if I opened my mouth, something would climb inside, and when I turned toward the sound, I saw the edge of something long and pale and jointed like a spider's leg dragging itself up into the hallway. And it stopped when it saw me, or felt me. I don't know if it had eyes, and it started to smile, or maybe it always was. But it was the kind of smile that stretched too far and too thin and cracked at the edges like dried leather. And then everything went black, and I don't remember falling asleep or passing out, but I woke up in the yard with the sun in my eyes and my hands covered in dirt. And the cellar door nailed shut again, but with nails I didn't own. And when I went to check my phone, it was back to normal, full charge, nothing wrong, like it had never failed. And for a few days, everything was silent again, even the dreams. But then I found something small and sharp under my bed, a tooth, human, and I don't know if it was mine, because I've been too afraid to check. And every time I try to leave, something happens, flat tires, dead batteries, roads washed out by rain that only seems to fall when I try to leave, and now I've started hearing the voice even when I'm awake, behind the walls, under the floor, whispering about the red earth and the deep house and the thing that lives beneath the roots of the house, and sometimes it says my name, but not like someone calling me, more like someone remembering me, like it's known me longer than I've been alive, and I think it's waiting for me to understand something terrible, something I already know but won't admit. And I haven't slept in 3 days, and the lights flicker even when there's no wind, and last night I saw a hand reach out from the kitchen sink, thin and gray and lined with black veins like roots, and when I turned on the light it was gone. But the water smelled like blood, and the walls won't stop bleeding in the corners of my vision. And I keep hearing footsteps in the attic even though there's no way up there, and the blueprints say the house has no attic at all, and I tried to burn it down, but the fire wouldn't catch, just died like the wood was too wet or too dead to burn. And sometimes I think I hear my brother's voice, even though he died last year, calling from the cellar, whispering that he found it too, that it followed him to the city, that it used him like it's using me. And I'm starting to remember things I know never happened to me, like waking up in the dark with dirt in my mouth and fingernails missing, or walking through tunnels beneath the earth with the walls pulsing like lungs. And the last time I looked in the mirror, my reflection smiled before I did, and its eyes weren't mine, and now I can't look away for too long because I feel it watching, waiting for me to forget which side of the glass I'm really on. And I think soon I'll go down into the cellar again, not because I want to, but because I have to, because I need to see it, need to understand it, need to remember what I was before I came here, before I woke it up, before I let it in. And when I do, I know I won't come back. not as myself, not as anything human, but something is already smiling beneath my skin and whispering in a voice that sounds like mine if I'd been buried alive. And maybe I was. Maybe this house is just a mouth. And I've already been swallowed. Story 10. I haven't told anyone this. Not really. Not out loud. Because the moment you say something like this, people start looking at you differently, like your mind has cracked open and spilled out something that should have stayed buried. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And no matter how many times I try to convince myself it wasn't real, that it was grief or stress or some twisted neurological glitch, I always come back to the way it smelled. Because dreams don't have smells that vivid, and hallucinations don't leave bruises in the shape of fingers around your ankle, and you don't wake up 3 towns away with mud in your mouth unless something very real dragged you there. So let me tell you what happened, all of it, and maybe you'll believe me or maybe you won't. Maybe you'll say I'm cursed or broken or sick, but that doesn't matter anymore because it's still out there. And if I don't let it out of me, I'm afraid it'll finish what it started, and I'll vanish like the others did. Piece by piece, memory by memory. So it began after my sister disappeared, just gone. 1 minute she was driving back from her shift at the diner, and the next her car was found abandoned on the side of a service road with the driver's side door wide open and her phone still in the cup holder, and there was blood on the steering wheel. Not a lot. Just a smear like someone had pressed their hand there before stepping out, and the whole town turned up to search the woods, and I walked those same trails for hours, screaming her name, following the broken branches and claw marks we told ourselves were probably just animals. And I didn't sleep for 3 nights straight, not even after the cops gave up and the press stopped calling. Because I knew she hadn't run away, she wouldn't do that. And on the 4th night I got a message, not a text, not an email, but a voice recording left on my old cassette machine, the one I hadn't touched in years, and I didn't even know it still worked. But there it was, spinning quietly, playing something soft and wet and wrong, and underneath the static was her voice whispering, not clearly, not fully formed, like it was struggling to use her throat. And she said my name, twice, once like a plea and once like a warning. And I felt something move behind me, just a breath, but cold enough to make every hair on my body stand up like roots breaking through skin. And I turned and saw nothing, but I knew it was close. I could feel it watching. And that night the dreams began, long corridors made of bone and smoke and glass, lit by a sky that pulsed like an open wound. And I'd see her there, at the far end, always walking away, whispering things I couldn't hear, and I'd chase her, screaming, running. But the hallway stretched with each step until it turned to a tunnel, then a throat, then a scream, and I'd wake up with my jaw clenched so tight it took minutes to force it open. And after a week of this, I drove to where they found her car, and sat on the hood and waited, and nothing came, not at first. But after sunset, I started hearing footsteps in the woods, soft and dragging, like bare feet across wet leaves, and I called out but got no reply, and then something whistled. Just one clear note like a lullaby sung too slowly, and I remembered she used to whistle like that to our dog when we were kids, and when I turned toward the sound I saw her face in the trees, just her face, floating between branches, eyes wide, mouth open. Not moving, not blinking, just staring, and then it vanished. And when I stood to run, I realized the forest had changed. The trail was gone. The road behind me had melted into shadow, and everything smelled like copper and soil and something sour. And I started walking, no idea where I was going, just away, until I found a house, not a real house, not anymore. More like the shell of something pretending to be a house, leaning crooked and pulsing faintly with a warmth I didn't want to understand. And the door was open, and something in me moved forward without my permission, like my body had its own will now. And the walls inside were damp and covered in names scratched deep into the wood, not carved, not etched, but clawed in with nails or teeth. And I found hers there, right above mine, both of them fresh, still oozing sap or blood or something in between. And when I touched it, the whole house shuddered like a heart skipping a beat. And I heard her voice again, behind the wall, not crying, not begging, just repeating one sentence over and over. It wears us, she said. It wears us to remember, And then the walls began to peel, not like wallpaper, but like skin, and underneath were faces, hundreds, all pressed into the wood, eyes closed, mouths open in a silent scream, and one of them was mine. And I stumbled back, tripped, fell into a hole that hadn't been there before, and landed in water so cold it burned. And there were hands in the dark, soft hands, too many fingers, pulling at me, holding me under, stroking my hair, whispering lullabies in reverse. And I remember looking up and seeing the surface above me rippling like skin. And then I was outside again, coughing up water and mud, and the house was gone. And the sky was normal, and my car was sitting exactly where I left it, keys still in the ignition. And I drove home and locked every door and nailed my windows shut, and I didn't sleep for days. But the dreams still came, and the recordings kept showing up. Not just on the cassette now, but on my phone, my laptop, my voicemail, all of them whispering that same sentence, "It wears us." And I started seeing people on the street with wrong shadows, too many joints in their arms, smiles that didn't end when the lips did. And I think it's trying to spread, to grow, and I think it needs me to help. And sometimes I wake up standing in strange rooms with symbols carved into the walls and my hands bleeding. And I don't remember doing it, but I can't stop either. And last night I looked in the mirror and saw her standing behind me, her skin stretched too tight, her eyes hollow and glowing from within like embers. And she smiled and said thank you, said now it remembers better. And I knew she wasn't her anymore, not really. Just something wearing her like a coat, like a name. And now it's my turn, and my mouth keeps moving when I'm not speaking, and my voice echoes twice when I'm alone, and the shadows whisper the names of people I haven't met yet. And I'm starting to understand what it meant, what it wants, and I know I can't run from it because it's not outside me anymore, it's inside, and every time I close my eyes it unzips me a little more, stretches me open, fills the spaces where fear used to be. And one of these nights I won't wake up as myself. I'll wake up smiling, and the voice in my throat will be its voice, and I'll walk into someone else's house and whisper their name. Story 11. I never wanted to believe the stories my grandmother used to tell us when we were kids, those long winding tales about the thing in the woods behind her old house. The thing with no name that lived under the roots of the dead trees and watched the windows from the darkness just after dusk. The thing she said whispered to people when they were alone long enough to hear it and promised them what they wanted in exchange for something they didn't understand until it was too late. But when she died and left me the house, I found myself back in that place with its damp walls and creaking floors and windows that always seemed to fog from the inside even in summer. And I told myself I would fix it up, maybe sell it, maybe live in it for a while to get away from everything after what happened with Claire, after she left and took most of the life with her. And maybe it was the silence I was looking for, or maybe it was the way grief turns everything familiar into a kind of ghost. But the longer I stayed in that house, the more I felt like I was never really alone in it, like something else was breathing just slightly out of sync with me in the same rooms. And it started small, like most things do. The radio turning on by itself in the middle of the night and playing static at full volume. The kitchen light flickering even after I replaced the bulb 3 times. The floorboards warping in places that had no water damage, and then the dreams began. Always the same, always the woods. Always that long, what sounded like something dragging itself through leaves. Always a voice I couldn't quite understand whispering to me from the trees, and every night I got a little closer to it, a little deeper into the woods. And then I started waking up with dirt under my nails and twigs in my hair, once even with a thorn embedded in my heel. And I told myself I was sleepwalking, that grief was doing strange things to my body, that maybe it was guilt or stress or loneliness. But the feeling of being watched never went away, and neither did the smell, that sharp metallic scent like blood and wet earth. And then I saw it for the first time, not fully, not clearly, just a shape at the tree line. Tall and thin and bent like its bones weren't put together the way ours are. And I didn't run. I couldn't. Because something about it was familiar in a way I didn't want to admit, like a voice I'd heard before in a dream I'd forgotten, and then it was gone, just gone. And for days after that, I felt like I was being followed inside my own skin, like my thoughts weren't mine, like my memories were being rewritten one image at a time, like the house had started to rearrange itself around me. And I found a door in the basement I didn't remember being there before, a small wooden door barely high enough to crawl through, and it was cold around it, unnaturally cold, and when I put my hand on it, I swear I heard whispering again, clearer now, saying my name, not like a question, but like a memory, like it had always known me. And when I opened the door, there were stairs going down, stone stairs that should have led straight into the dirt but didn't. And the air down there was wet and thick and full of a sound I couldn't place, like breathing but deeper, slower, older, and the walls were covered in markings, spirals and eyes and things that moved when I looked at them too long. And I walked for what felt like hours, and the stairs never ended, and I never once felt tired, just hollow. Like I'd left my body somewhere behind me, and at the bottom there was a room full of roots twisted into shapes almost human, some hanging like corpses, some bent in poses of worship or agony, and in the middle of it all was a mirror, not framed, not hung, just standing there, too tall, too wide, and in it I didn't see myself, but something behind me, something close, something smiling with a mouth full of too many teeth and eyes that blinked in opposite directions. And when I turned around, there was nothing there, but I could still feel the heat of its breath on the back of my neck, and I ran. I think I ran. But the next thing I remember, I was waking up in my bed with mud on the sheets and my legs aching like I'd climbed a mountain. And the door in the basement was gone again, like it had never been there. And after that, the dreams got worse. Not just the woods now, but faces I recognized from old photographs, faces of people who had gone missing from the area over the last 50 years, their eyes gone, their mouths sewn shut with roots, all of them whispering the same word in my head over and over, remember. And I started hearing footsteps in the house at night, not upstairs or outside, but in the walls and the floorboards, underneath the bed. And my phone stopped working. The internet wouldn't connect. Even the power flickered, like the house was trying to push the modern world away so it could be what it was before. And then the voice started speaking to me while I was awake, from the corners of the room, from the static of the broken television, from the drain in the bathtub. And it told me things about my sister I hadn't thought about in years, about the accident we never talked about the things we buried in the woods, and the promises we made when we were children and didn't understand what was listening. And I remembered the night she cut her hand and bled into the soil beneath the old dead tree and said the words from Grandma's story, half joking, half curious, and how I laughed and did the same, and how the next day we both had the same dream, and how she never really slept right after that. And I realized this wasn't new, this wasn't sudden. This thing had been with us for a long time, waiting, growing, becoming, and I was the one who left and forgot. And she was the one who stayed and became part of it. And now it wanted me to come back, to finish what we started, to wear the shape it had waiting for me, under the ground. And every mirror in the house showed me a little less of myself and a little more of it. And when I spoke, my voice echoed like it was coming from a tunnel. And every night I got closer to that place in the woods again, not in dreams now, but in waking, drawn there like a magnet. And last night I walked the path in the rain barefoot and blindfolded, just like it told me to. And when I got there, the ground split open like a mouth, and something inside it whispered my name with her voice. And I stepped forward and felt the dirt reach up and take my hand like an old friend. And now I'm sitting here in the kitchen writing this with fingers that don't feel like mine, and a heartbeat that skips when I try to remember who I used to be. And I know it's coming soon, the last dream, the last voice, the last step into whatever it is that lives beneath the roots. And when it happens, I won't be able to stop it, and I don't think I'll want to. Story 12. I never thought anything would come of it. Not really, not when we were just kids trying to scare each other at sleepovers with stories about the old man who died in the attic of the house at the end of Merrow Lane. The one nobody wanted to buy even though the property taxes were practically nothing. The one with the roof that sagged like a broken back and windows smeared from the inside. The one where the last owner hung himself in the stairwell and wasn't found for 3 weeks until someone noticed the smell. And we used to dare each other to run up and touch the door at night, sometimes going so far as to press our ears to the wood and claim we heard breathing behind it, but none of us ever opened it. Not until the night I turned 17 and my friends dared me to go inside because I was the only one with the guts and the keys, because I had broken into the real estate office a week earlier and stolen the spirit. And when I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the cold. Not the kind of cold you feel in your bones during winter, but the kind that feels like fingers slipping into your spine. And I should have turned back right then, but something about the house felt heavy with silence, not empty but watching, waiting. Like it remembered me from all the times I walked past it and whispered stupid things to it. And the deeper I went, the more wrong everything became. Like the walls were a little too narrow, and the doors a little too tall, and the air a little too wet. And the furniture inside hadn't been touched in years, but there was no dust, just this oily film on everything, like the house had been sweating. And I remember walking through the living room and seeing the reflection of someone behind me in the old mirror hanging above the fireplace, even though I was alone. And I told myself it was just a trick of light, that my nerves were playing games with me. But then I turned and saw that the hallway I'd just come from was now a staircase going down, and I hadn't seen it before, and something about the steps made me think of teeth, yellowed and uneven, and still I went down. Because I told myself I had to prove I wasn't afraid, that the stories were just stories, that the house wasn't anything more than old wood and bad memories, and at the bottom of the stairs was a narrow corridor lit by a red bulb swinging from the ceiling even though there was no power, and on the walls were photographs, hundreds of them, tacked and taped and nailed at odd angles, and in each one was a person sitting in the very chair I now saw at the end of the hallway, facing the wall, except their eyes had been scratched out with something sharp, and not just in the photos but in real life, because the chair was soaked with something black and old, and the wall in front of it was smeared with claw marks. And when I turned around to run, the hallway behind me had disappeared, replaced by another room I hadn't seen before, and in it were more chairs, all of them facing away from me, and all of them occupied by people with bags over their heads and ropes around their necks, not hanging but slumped, like marionettes waiting for the next performance. And I don't know why I stepped forward, why I reached out to the nearest one and pulled the bag off, but when I did, it was me underneath, my own face, bloated and blue, eyes wide and mouth open in a scream that never stopped, and the figure twitched and fell over, and the others began to stir, and I ran. I don't know how I found stairs again, but I did, and I climbed them two at a time until I burst into the attic, not the front door, not the hallway, but the attic. And I realized with this sick drop in my stomach that the house wasn't following the rules of reality anymore, if it ever had, and in the attic were candles, dozens of them, floating, not sitting on anything, just hovering in the air like fireflies frozen in place, and in their light I saw words scratched into the beams, "We let it in," over and over again, and I could hear whispering, so close it felt like it was inside my ears, and the words didn't make sense, but they made me feel things I didn't want to feel, like guilt for things I'd never done and grief for people I didn't know. And behind the whispering was something else, a low rhythmic sound like breathing filtered through gravel, and when I turned I saw something unfolding from the far corner, something tall and thin and wet, with limbs that bent wrong and skin that looked like it had been flayed and stitched back together, and I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it smiling, and I backed into the wall and realized there was a mirror behind me, and in the mirror I saw myself staring forward, eyes glazed, mouth moving, whispering the words I was hearing even though I wasn't speaking them, and the thing touched my reflection, and I felt it like claws inside my stomach, pulling, stretching, and everything went black, and when I woke up I was lying outside, the house with the door wide open behind me, and the sky was full of gray light like dawn had forgotten how to be blue, and I told everyone I just got spooked, that I passed out, that I hit my head, but I never told them what I saw or what followed me home. Because after that night, I started seeing things in the corners of my room, dark shapes that vanished when I turned my head but left claw marks on the walls, and I started waking up in places I hadn't gone to sleep, like the shed in my backyard or the crawl space under the house, and once in the attic with my hands full of dirt and fingernails missing. And the worst part was the way people looked at me, like they knew something had changed even if they couldn't say what, and animals avoided me, wouldn't look me in the eye, and electronics flickered when I walked by. And I started hearing breathing behind me every time I looked in a mirror, and it never stopped, never left, never let go. And the dreams got worse, longer, more vivid, until I wasn't sure if I was ever really awake at all. And one night I saw the house again, not in my mind, but in front of me, just standing there on the other side of the highway, even though it had burned down 6 months ago with no one inside. And when I stepped toward it, the front door opened on its own, and the whispering came rushing out like wine through a tunnel, and I felt my feet moving without permission. And the last thing I remember is standing in front of that old mirror again, and seeing not myself, but 100 versions of me staring back with empty sockets and mouths full of blood, all whispering in perfect unison. We let it in. And I know now that the house was never haunted, it was alive, and it was hungry. And I was the door. Story 13. I never should have taken the job. Never should have answered that listing in the back of the paper that read simply, "Night security, $500 a night. Must be discreet. Call after 11 p.m. And maybe I should have known something was off when the man on the other end of the line didn't ask for my name or resume, just my shoe size and whether or not I was prone to sleepwalking. And when I said no, he told me to meet him at the northeast corner of the old Ashbrook Sanatorium ruins at midnight, alone, and bring nothing except a flashlight with red light mode and a willingness to keep my eyes shut when told, which should have been enough to hang up, forget the call, and get some sleep. But things hadn't been easy for me since I left my last job under what you might call unusual circumstances after that night I can't remember, but still wake up screaming from. So I went like a fool with more desperation than sense. And the man who met me at the gate was wearing a coat too long for summer, and sunglasses too dark for midnight. And he handed me a tarnished brass key with a little paper tag attached that read C block, roof access. And he told me I'd be alone until sunrise, that there were cameras watching, and that whatever I heard between the hours of 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock, I was not to investigate under any circumstance. And if I made it through the night, I'd be paid in cash the next morning. And I wanted to ask him why me, why here, but his eyes never moved behind the sunglasses, and his teeth were too small and too many when he smiled. So I just nodded and walked through the crumbling gate into what used to be one of the state's most notorious psychiatric hospitals, a place that closed in the 60s after rumors of patient disappearances, unethical experiments, and something they only ever referred to in hushed tones as the experiment that couldn't die. And despite the fact that I had grown up with the legends of Ashbrook, stories of doctors going mad, nurses disappearing, patients whose rooms were found full of dead birds with their eyes sewn open, I figured the building itself was dead, just stone and mold and rotting wood. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew that something was wrong, not just the smell, which was like old meat left in a warm basement, but the silence, a deep, hungry silence that pressed against my skull. And as I climbed the stairs to C block, I saw scratches on the walls at shoulder height, some of them deep enough to expose the rusted steel beneath the old plaster, and I told myself it was just rats, just vandals, anything but what it looked like. And when I reached the roof access door, I found it propped open with a brick, and beyond it was a little room full of dusty monitors and a rust-colored lounge chair bolted to the floor, the kind of room where someone watched something long enough to forget they had a body. And there was a clipboard with a single page left on it, the top half covered in names, the bottom half with red ink that read, "Do not look past the edge." And I didn't know what that meant until around 1:58 a.m. when I heard the first voice, not from the stairs, not from inside the building, but from just beyond the ledge of the roof. And it wasn't calling for help, it was whispering my name, my full name, not the one I gave people, but the one only my mother used when she was scared for me. And I knew, somehow, that if I looked, if I even moved toward the edge, I would see something that would not only break me, but would follow me back inside my skull and wear my memories like a coat. And the worst part was how familiar the voice sounded, not like a stranger, not like something pretending, but like someone I had loved and forgotten and left behind. And it didn't stop. not for the entire hour. It whispered and wept and laughed in a low voice that trembled with hunger. And sometimes it scraped something sharp across the brick ledge like fingernails made of bone, and I sat there in the chair, with the flashlight turned off, biting down on the collar of my shirt just to keep from answering it. And when the clock on the wall clicked to 3:01, the whispering stopped all at once, like it had never been there, and I let out a breath so sharp it hurt my ribs. But then I noticed something new. My name was now written in the dust on the inside of the glass door, written backward from the outside, like someone had stood out there for a long time watching me and waited for the moment to remind me that I had been seen. And when the sun came up and I went back down the stairs, the whole building felt different, not less dangerous, but satisfied, like it had been fed. And the man with the sunglasses was waiting by the gate with a plain brown envelope full of old $20 bills and a smile that didn't reach his cheeks. And he asked me if I wanted to come back the next night. And for reasons I still don't understand, I said yes. And that night it was worse. Not just whispers, but footsteps on the roof. Long, dragging footsteps like someone with a broken ankle crawling toward the hatch. And sometimes they stopped directly above my head, and something would knock once, twice, 3 times, slow and rhythmic. And my flashlight wouldn't turn on no matter how hard I pressed the button. And I started to hear breathing from the stairwell, slow and wet and desperate. And when I closed my eyes, I saw images I've never forgotten. A face with no eyes, only holes that dripped black. Fluid onto a hospital gown. Hands with too many fingers reaching for a doorknob that wasn't there. A mouth opening in the wall like a wound, whispering my childhood secrets back to me in my father's voice. And I must have passed out, because when I woke up the sun was up and the man was there again. And this time the envelope was heavier, and he didn't ask if I wanted to come back. He just handed me another key marked Ward 5, sublevel, and told me I was ready, and I should have run, burned the money and disappeared. But something had started to change inside me, like I was being rewired, like the building had sunk its fingers into my nervous system and begun playing me like an instrument. And the third night was different, quieter at first, colder than any night I'd felt in July, like the entire sublevel existed inside a freezer that had never been defrosted. And the hallway leading to Ward 5 was lined with cell doors, each with little square windows at eye level. And as I passed each one, I saw flickers of movement, shadows pacing back and forth, something scratching the glass from the inside. And one of the doors had a smear of something dark that looked like blood but smelled like burnt plastic. And when I reached the door marked observation, my key fit perfectly, and inside was a room full of files, medical documents stamped confidential in red ink. And every one of them listed patients that had been committed under aliases that turned out to be missing. People from nearby towns, some going back to the 1930s. And there was one file with no name, just a number, 0001. And it didn't list any diagnosis, just a series of increasingly frantic notes from the attending physician, all of them describing changes in behavior, in physicality, in time perception. And the final entry read, "Patient no longer reflects in mirrors, but seems aware of observation, appears in dreams of staff, recommends total isolation." And beneath it someone had scrawled, "IT. Still remembers the door." And before I could process what that meant, the lights went out, and the room filled with that same breathing sound, like lungs full of fluid dragging through a straw. And I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only watch as a hand reached through the file cabinet, a hand with no skin, only exposed tendon and gleaming bone, and pulled out the 0001 file, folded it once, and shoved it into the wall, which accepted it like flesh. And then a face emerged, not a full face, but a suggestion of one, an impression, and it whispered, "You saw too much." And when I woke up, I was lying in the parking lot outside Ashbrook with a key taped to my chest and a single word carved into my arm, "Stay." And I don't know how much time has passed since then, because every time I try to leave the county, my car engine fails or the road leads me back to the same stretch of woods behind the sanatorium. And every night I dream of the roof again, of the voice calling my name from just beyond the ledge. And some part of me knows that if I ever look, really look, I'll understand what it's been trying to show me all along. That the thing in Ashbrook isn't trapped inside the building. It's trapped inside me. And every night I stay away, it grows hungrier, whispering through every screen I own, every mirror, every puddle. And soon, I think, it won't need the building at all, because it will have my voice. And when it calls for someone else from the edge, they'll listen. Story 14. I don't know why I ever thought it was a good idea to take the box. I don't know why I didn't listen to the feeling in my stomach that told me to leave it buried when we found it in the woods that day. Half rotted and wrapped in a thick cloth that crumbled to the touch like old leaves, buried beneath stones arranged in a circle too perfect to be random, with strange symbols carved into each rock. But we were stupid, curious, bored city kids on a weekend hike, high on weed and self-confidence. And when I pulled the box free, it let out a sound like a breath held too long finally escaping, and my friend Marcus said it was probably some old relic or maybe a time capsule, and dared me to open it, but something about the latch, a tarnished brass hook twisted into the shape of a tongue, made me hesitate, even though I eventually did it, even though I wish now that I hadn't, because when I pried it open, it didn't hold anything old or historical, just a bundle of human hair tied with twine. 3 fingernails still stained with blood, a photograph of a face I didn't recognize but which looked eerily like mine with the eyes burned out, and a slip of paper so brittle it nearly disintegrated when I touched it, scrawled with a message in red ink that said, "You took what was given, now give what was taken." And Marcus laughed and said it was probably some weird art project, that maybe we were on some kind of cursed geocache or horror-themed scavenger hunt, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd opened something we weren't supposed to, like we had reached into the earth's throat and pulled something out that it had long ago decided to forget, and the air around us changed. It got thick and slow, like we were underwater, and when I blinked, I swear the trees had moved, closer, bending in toward us like they were listening, and Marcus suddenly threw up, just collapsed onto all fours and emptied his stomach into the leaves, and when I helped him up he was pale and shaking and kept muttering about a woman with no face who whispered in his ear in a language that felt like biting. And I tried to laugh it off even though I felt something brush against my ankle, something cold and wet and slow, and the box felt heavier in my hands now, like it was filling with something invisible but dense, and I should have put it back, should have reburied it and left the woods and never spoken of it again. But instead we brought it back with us, all the way home, and I put it in the back of my closet, wrapped in towels and duct tape and locked in an old chest, and I tried to forget it, I really did. But that night, I had a dream where I was standing in a forest that stretched forever, where the sky was a flickering red veil and the moon bled light that burned my skin, and in the distance, I could hear something dragging chains over stone, and every time I tried to move, the trees closed in around me like fingers, and when I woke up, my sheets were soaked. My nails were broken, and my feet were covered in dirt and pine needles, and I told myself I must have sleepwalked, even though I'd never done that before, and even though the forest from my dream looked exactly like the clearing where we found the box. And the next day Marcus didn't answer his phone, and when I went to his place, his roommate said he'd been gone since dawn, said he just left his room a mess and walked barefoot into the morning like he was in a trance, and they found him 2 days later in a nearby park, curled up beneath a bench, his mouth full of hair, his tongue missing, and his fingernails peeled back like he'd tried to claw something out of his own throat. And I didn't go to the hospital, didn't visit, because I knew, somehow, that it was the box, that we'd taken something that wasn't ours, and I started hearing things in my apartment, little creaks that sounded like footsteps, breathing behind the bathroom door, shadows that didn't move when I did, and every night, the dreams got worse, more vivid, more invasive, until I stopped being able to tell when I was awake and when I wasn't, because the face of the woman with no features was always there, waiting, hovering at the edge of my bed, her long fingers clutching the strings that ran down into my chest, and I stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped answering texts, and when I finally tried to destroy the box, set it on fire in the sink, it didn't burn. It just let out a low hiss like steam escaping from flesh, and the smoke it gave off wasn't gray but black and thick, and it filled the room like a scream I couldn't hear but could feel in my teeth. And I passed out and woke up 3 hours later with burns on my arms in the shape of fingers that weren't mine. And after that I started seeing her in reflections, not all the time, just enough to make me dread every mirror, every puddle, every shiny surface, and always she'd get closer, like she was learning how to reach me. And sometimes at night, I'd wake up unable to move, with the box sitting on my chest, no matter where I'd hidden it, and my mouth full of soil and something that squirmed. And one night, I found my own handwriting on the wall in red ink I didn't remember writing. Give what was taken. Give what was taken. Give what was taken. Over and over until the pin tore through the drywall. And I realized she wanted something real, something that I could only repay in kind. So I tried to go back to the forest, but I couldn't find it, no matter how far I drove, like the woods had moved on or hidden themselves from me. And I started getting sick. Started seeing shapes in the corners of rooms that followed me from place to place. Started finding pieces of the box in places I'd never put them. One morning the latch was under my pillow. One night the bundle of hair was in my mouth when I woke up gagging, and I started hearing Marcus's voice, whispering things from the closet, begging me to let her out, to finish what we started. And sometimes he laughed, not like him, but like something using his voice like a puppet. And I haven't slept in 3 days now. I haven't left my apartment, and the walls feel like they're pulsing, like I'm inside something that's breathing around me. And the box is open on the floor even though I never touched it, and inside is a new slip of paper that says, "You are the door," and I finally understand what that means. I finally know that it wasn't about the box, not really. It was about me. It was about marking me, making me the vessel for something that needed to get out, something that was buried long ago for a reason. And now it's awake, and it's waiting, and I can feel it in my bones, moving, curling, hungry. And I don't know if there's anything left of me anymore, if I'm just something it's wearing until it finds someone else, maybe someone reading this, maybe someone who's curious enough to go into the woods to find a box that looks like it doesn't belong, and to open it, and take what's inside, and become the next door. Story 15. I should have known something was wrong with the apartment the moment I stepped inside, not just because it was too cheap for the area or that the landlord refused to meet me in person and only gave vague, slow answers over text, but because it felt off the way some places just do, like the walls had been watching for a long time without blinking and didn't quite know how to stop. But I moved in anyway because I was desperate, jobless, recently ghosted by someone I thought I'd marry, and I thought maybe a new place would help me reset or at least give me space to be miserable alone. And at first it seemed fine if a little too quiet, the way the wind rattled the window panes even when the air outside was still, or how the overhead light in the kitchen never fully turned off, always pulsing faintly like it was breathing. And I chalked it up to old wiring and bad insulation until I started noticing the dreams. Not the typical scattered nonsense, but vivid and heavy and dark dreams, where I'd wake up in a room just like mine but wrong somehow, where the shadows were too thick and something moved just out of sight, where I could hear a man whispering my name from inside the walls, but when I tried to find him the floor would stretch, the door would vanish, and I'd wake up sweating and sore like I'd been running, and after a week I started waking up with bruises I couldn't explain, like fingerprints pressed too hard into my skin. One night on my thighs, another night around my wrist, and once even a perfect ring around my ankle like something had tried to drag me, and I thought maybe I was doing it to myself in my sleep, but the prints were always too big for my own hands. And then came the knocking. Soft at first, like someone tapping on the other side of the bedroom wall at 3:07 every single morning, and when I knocked back it stopped, only to start again the next night louder and closer like it was moving toward me one wall at a time. And one night I stayed up, with all the lights on, my phone camera pointed at the wall, trying to record it, and at 3:07 exactly it began, not just the tapping but a slow dragging sound, like something pulling itself along just beneath the plaster. And then a voice said not a word but a sound, a groan, deep and wet and full of teeth, and my camera glitched, the lights flickered, and I swear the wall bulged like something pushed from inside trying to come through, and after that I stopped sleeping entirely for a while. Tried staying at a friend's, but I kept getting nosebleeds and migraines unless I was inside the apartment, like something in me had been tied to the place and didn't want to leave, and then things started going missing. Not big things, but little things with weight. My keys, my medication, my grandfather's ring, all gone one by one. And in their place I'd find things I didn't own. A tooth on my nightstand, still bloodied at the root. An old nail driven into the floor under my rug. A child's drawing of a man with no face holding a string tied to a doll that looked exactly like me. And I started hearing things through the vents, not voices anymore, but laughter, high-pitched and wrong. And once the sound of dozens of feet scurrying across metal like rats, but too fast, too rhythmic, like they were dancing. And I tried contacting the landlord, but the number disconnected. The website where I found the listing vanished. And when I went to the county office, they told me the building had been condemned 5 years ago after a fire, and that the third floor where my unit was located hadn't existed since 2019, that it had collapsed completely and no one had been allowed up there since. And when I insisted I lived there, they looked at me like I was insane and gave me a pamphlet for psychiatric services. And when I went back to the building that night, it was still there, still standing, still waiting with my name on the buzzer. And I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I'd had a breakdown and imagined the last few weeks. But everything in my unit was exactly where I left it, the bed unmade, the mirror still covered with the sheet I'd taped up after I saw something moving in it that didn't mimic my movements. And when I went to check my phone, I saw photos I hadn't taken, grainy black and white stills of me sleeping taken from the ceiling, my eyes open in some of them, staring directly at the lens, my mouth wide as if mid-scream, though I remember no sound. And the bruises were worse, deeper, spreading like veins under my skin, and I could smell something rotting in the pipes even though I never cooked, and the air tasted like pennies, like blood, and I started seeing her, the woman in the mirror, tall and thin and blurry, always standing behind me when I brushed my teeth, always gone when I turned around, her face wrapped in gauze soaked through with red, her fingers too long, her mouth always opening wider and wider as if ready to swallow me whole. And once I saw her crouched in the corner of the ceiling, crab-like and humming a lullaby I hadn't heard since childhood. And the worst part was the more I looked, the more familiar she became, like someone I'd forgotten, someone who had lived in me before I was born. And I started dreaming in reverse, waking up more exhausted than when I went to bed, time folding in on itself, so I couldn't tell if it was Monday or Thursday or 3 a.m. or 9 p.m. And I started remembering things that weren't mine. The taste of smoke in a burning room, the feel of water closing over my face, the weight of a child in my arms as I stepped off a ledge into dark water. And I understood then that the apartment wasn't haunted. Not exactly. It was a mouth, a wound. A place that fed on time and memory and pain. A place where things that should have died go to wait for someone new to wear. And I realized I was being hollowed out. Not all at once, but slowly, dream by dream, bruise by bruise, like something was carving me. Open from the inside, replacing what made me myself with its own story. And one night I woke up outside my own door. Keys gone, hands dirty. And when I got back inside, everything had been moved 6 inches to the left, like someone tried to put it all back, but didn't quite understand how. And the TV was on even though it wasn't plugged in, playing a static-filled video of me walking backward into a wall and vanishing, over and over, looped in silence except for a low whisper underneath it saying, "You let her in." And after that I started seeing the hallway stretch at night, the door at the end getting further away the closer I got. And sometimes I'd open my closet and it would be filled with soil and teeth and hair. And when I closed it and opened it again, it was empty, and the floor felt soft like I was walking on flesh. And the last time I looked in the mirror, I saw not me, but her, smiling with my lips, her eyes where mine used to be, and she said, in my voice, "You're doing so well." And now I think I understand that this place wasn't found. It found me, chose me. Maybe because I was already empty enough to make room. Maybe because I answered the ad. Maybe because I was the only one stupid enough to stay. And I don't know how long I've been here now, days, Weeks? There's no more time, no more sky, just the walls breathing and the mirror pulsing and the soft sound of laughter inside my ears even when I press them shut. And sometimes I wake up to find writing on the walls in a language I understand only when I'm dreaming. And I know now that I'm not supposed to leave, that I was never supposed to, that the bruises were doors and the dreams were locks and she was the key and the building was her body, and I am just the skin she wears until someone else moves in. So if you ever find a listing for an apartment you've never heard of, on a street that doesn't exist on maps, and it's too cheap, and the landlord won't meet you, and the photos don't quite make sense, don't go, don't answer, don't reply. Because if you do, she'll know your name too, and once she knows your name, you're already hers. Story 16. I don't care if you believe me. I'm not saying this to scare you or to make you think I'm crazy. I just need someone to know. Someone to carry even a sliver of what I've seen so I'm not alone in it anymore. Because what happened to me 2 years ago in that nursing home wasn't just a nightmare or a mistake or a bad trip. It was something old and real and buried, something I wasn't supposed to witness. And it all started the day I took the night shift at Briar Glen, a small elder care facility, just outside the edge of town, the kind of place with more ghosts than visitors, where the wallpaper peels at the corners and the flickering fluorescent lights feel more like a warning than a failure, and I needed the job badly after getting fired from the hospital. So I said yes even when the other staff wouldn't make eye contact, even when they told me to never go into room 6 after midnight unless it was a life or death emergency, and I laughed it off at first, thought it was just superstition or hazing or maybe some kind of weird joke. But when I checked the assignment chart, room 6 was always listed as unoccupied even though I'd see shadows under the door at night, hear the bed creak softly like someone was rolling over. And once I thought I saw someone standing just inside when I passed by, a figure with a body too long for the bed, sitting straight up with its face turned toward the wall, and I figured maybe it was just a weird patient no one talked about, someone with a rich family or a lawsuit or maybe a mind so far gone that they just left him there and pretended he wasn't real. But on the 4th night, I made the mistake of opening the door just a crack, just to peek in, and it was empty, absolutely spotless. The bed perfectly made, no smell, no sound, no one. But as I closed the door again, I could swear I felt something brush past me, just barely, like the soft drag of fingertips on my neck, and I turned. But the hallway was empty except for the sound of a TV playing static somewhere far down the west wing, and I asked Marcy, the head nurse, about room 6 the next morning, and she gave me a look like I'd just told her someone whispered her dead husband's name, and she said, very slowly, "Don't ask questions if you want to keep your mind." And I didn't understand what she meant until later, until things got worse, until one of the residents started screaming during a night storm and said she saw something crawling on the ceiling, long arms and an eyeless face that dripped black from its mouth. And when I got to her room, there was nothing but her trembling under the sheets, whispering the words, "It comes when it rains." And after that night, the power would flicker every time it stormed. And I'd find wet footprints on the hallway tiles that led to room 6, but stopped abruptly halfway down the hall as if the thing that left them had either vanished or melted into the floor. And I started dreaming about the room even when I was home. Dreams where I'd stand at the threshold with no door, just an endless corridor of flickering lights, and something would be waiting at the end, whispering my name in a voice that sounded like mine played backward, and every night it would get closer. And I'd wake up with my ears bleeding, real blood, not imagined, and a pressure in my head like something was nesting behind my eyes. And the worst part was the sound I started hearing when I was awake, a low hum like machinery buried under the floor. Constant and pulsing, getting louder when I stood near room 6. And then came the night I found the photo, slipped under my office door, a black and white picture of room 6 from the outside. And in the window, there was a face, or something like a face, too stretched to be human, and yet still horrifyingly familiar, and on the back was written, "You opened the door." And I tried to report it to management, but the director was out of town, and no one else took it seriously, just told me to get some sleep, but I couldn't sleep anymore, not when I started seeing reflections in places they shouldn't be, faces in the sink drain, eyes blinking open in the floor tiles. The silhouette of something standing behind me in the soap-streaked glass of the medication room. And then one night room 6 opened on its own, the door clicking softly like a polite invitation, and I don't know what made me walk inside. Maybe I was too tired or too curious, or maybe it had already gotten inside me, but I stepped through the threshold, and the moment I did, the door slammed shut behind me and I was in darkness. Not ordinary darkness, but the kind that bends sound in each breath. And I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and saw the walls were covered in carvings. Not words, not symbols, but writhing patterns that seemed to move when I looked away. And in the center of the room was the bed, but it wasn't empty. There was a shape under the sheet, rising and falling with breaths that were too slow, too long. And when I stepped closer, the sheet peeled back on its own, and I saw myself lying there, eyes open and weeping, mouth open but no sound. And then my reflection sat up and whispered, "You should never have come here." And I stumbled backward and hit the wall, and the carvings started glowing red like embers, and the thing in the bed crawled off and onto the floor with a sound like wet meat, and its face peeled away like paper, revealing not flesh but a swirling tunnel of teeth and whispering voices, and I screamed, but there was no air. And I woke up in my apartment with dirt on my hands and the photo still in my pocket, except the writing on the back had changed. Now it said, "You're still there." And when I went back to Briar Glen, no one remembered me, not Marcy, not the receptionist, not the patients. And when I asked about room 6, they said the building only had 5 rooms per wing, that there never was a room 6. And I demanded to see the east wing, and it was sealed off, the door bricked over and forgotten, like it had never been there. And since then I haven't slept more than an hour at a time, and every time I close my eyes I dream of that room. Except now I'm inside it always, pacing, screaming, waiting. And I've started seeing other people in the dreams too, people I don't know but recognize from somewhere. People who wake up the same way I do, gasping, coughing up ash, and I think it's spreading. I think room 6 isn't a room at all, but a doorway to something beneath our world, something that feeds on memory and sleep and self. And every time someone dreams of it, it grows stronger, pulls more of us in, and I don't know how much longer I have before I stop waking up. Before the me that lives in the bed becomes the only version left. So if you ever find yourself in a dream where there's a hallway you don't recognize and a door at the end marked 6, don't open it. Don't even look at it. Turn around and scream yourself awake. Because if you step through, you're not coming back. Not all of you anyway. Story 17. I don't know how to explain it without sounding insane, but something happened to me 3 winters ago when I took a temporary job as a night security guard at an old power station out in the valley near the edge of the woods. A facility that had long since shut down but still required someone to walk the perimeter, check the gate, and monitor the control room for intrusions or structural problems. And I took it because the pay was better than anything else I could get, and I thought being alone all night in a dead building wouldn't be that bad. But from the first shift something felt wrong, not just eerie or abandoned, but deeply wrong, like the place had gone sour. Like the air inside wasn't quite air, and the shadows lasted a little longer than they should and made shapes that didn't match what was casting them. And I laughed it off as nerves or overactive imagination. The kind of paranoia that comes with silence and flickering lights and echoing hallways. But the longer I stayed though, more it seemed like the place wasn't empty at all, that it breathed and waited and watched. And I started noticing things like puddles that didn't dry, always the same shape, always cold to the touch. Or the hum of the old generator, which wasn't even connected to the grid anymore, but sometimes started vibrating like it was alive again and spinning up power for something I couldn't see. And the cameras on the 3rd floor always glitched at exactly 3:12 a.m. and resumed at 3:17 with a strange echo left behind in the audio, like someone whispering in reverse. And then came the night I found the elevator door on sublevel 2 wide open, even though the elevator hadn't worked for years, the shaft sealed by rust and time. But the door was open and the interior lit with a weak yellow glow, and I stood there just staring into it, unable to move, until I heard a sound I still can't describe coming from the bottom of the shaft, wet and clicking and rhythmic like bones turning on a wheel. And I slammed the door shut, and ran back upstairs, locking myself in the control room and refusing to look at the monitors for the rest of the night. But the monitors turned themselves back on one by one around 4 a.m., and every screen showed the same hallway from a different angle, a hallway that wasn't part of the station's blueprint, and in the footage something was moving slowly toward the camera. Its form bent low and twitching like it was glitching through frames of motion, and every light on. The console turned red and alarms started blaring even though the station had no active alarm system, and the door to the control room began to shake like something was pressing against it, not violently but rhythmically like knocking or breathing. And I remember standing there frozen, too scared to cry or scream, and then everything went silent all at once, like a plug had been pulled from the world, and I heard my own heartbeat like thunder in my skull, and the door creaked open just an inch. Enough to let a sliver of light in from a hallway that should have been dark, and I swear something was standing there, not entering but watching, a silhouette of stretched limbs and a head that moved too slowly, like it was rotating on something mechanical. And I blinked and it was gone, and when I stepped into the hallway everything was dark again except for a puddle of water in the exact same shape I'd seen before, leading from the control room all the way down the hall to the sealed sublevel entrance. And I quit that morning, told them I had the flu or a family emergency, anything to get out. But for weeks after I kept dreaming of the power station, only it was underwater in the dreams. The whole place submerged in a black ocean, and I'd be walking the halls without gear, unable to breathe but somehow not dying, and the walls would be covered in eyes that blinked in unison and mouths that didn't speak but opened and opened and opened. And I'd wake up coughing up water even though my mouth was dry, and my ears would ring like I'd been too close to something loud and old. And one night I woke up standing at my front door with my keys in hand and no memory of getting up or getting dressed. And in my dream that night the hallway from the monitor was there again, and I was walking toward a red light at the end of it while something behind me followed slowly, making no sound but getting closer with every step I took. And when I reached the end of the hallway I saw a door that looked exactly like my apartment door, and I opened it and saw myself sleeping. Only my face was wrong, too wide, eyes open, mouth full of water and wires, and I turned around and woke up screaming. And for days after I couldn't stop smelling burnt plastic and mold and wet iron, and things kept turning on in my apartment. My microwave, my radio, even a lamp I hadn't plugged in, and they would all flash numbers I didn't understand. Like 312 or 44:44 or just strings of eights, and I started noticing that every photo I had of myself looked subtly different, like I was moving in them when I wasn't looking, and one of them had something standing behind me in the background that I hadn't noticed before, a tall thing with long arms and no face, just the outline of a head glowing faintly with the same yellow light from the elevator shaft, and I tried to forget, to drown it all in routine and noise and therapy and sleep meds. But nothing worked because the thing followed me, not always close, not always visible, but present, sometimes in the edge of my mirror or the flicker of a screen or a shadow where there shouldn't be one. And I started hearing that same rhythmic clicking again, low and pulsing like it was echoing through my spine. And then came the night I blacked out completely and woke up in the woods near the old power station with blood on my hands and a torn piece of paper in my pocket that said, "Room for one more," and a crude drawing of a hallway that looked exactly like the one from the monitors. And I couldn't tell if I had drawn it or found it or if someone had given it to me, but I know now that I brought something back with me from that place, something that lives in the cracks between places, in the dead electricity and forgotten corners of old buildings and empty elevators, something that wears our shape until it remembers how to move like us. And sometimes I catch it mimicking me when I walk past reflective glass, half a beat behind. Almost perfect, but not quite. And I keep all the lights on now and avoid elevators and never ever look at old buildings for too long because sometimes I can feel it looking back through the windows, waiting to be recognized. And every time I sleep I dream of the station submerged again. And the hallway is longer, and the thing at the end is closer. And one day I know I won't wake up here. I'll wake up in that place, deep below, cold and humming and drowned in wire and steel and breathless pressure. And when I do, I'll still look like me, I'll still sound like me, but I won't be me anymore, not fully. And that version of me will walk into the world with a smile that's just a little too wide and hands that never warm and eyes that never blink, and no one will know until it's too late. Story 18. I used to laugh at people who said they saw things, who spoke about hauntings or shadows or unspeakable evil with wide eyes and trembling voices because I thought it was all delusion or fantasy or a way to make themselves feel special in a world that doesn't care. But everything changed one October when I agreed to house sit for my uncle in rural Maine, a man I barely knew who'd become a recluse after retiring from a geological survey job that took him to strange parts of the world. A man who was once animated and intelligent but who, in his last years, muttered to himself and kept all the windows covered and left his lights on at all hours. And I thought it would be a peaceful break from my city job, a quiet week of reading, hiking, and resetting my mind. But the moment I stepped into his crooked old house, I felt it, the tension in the air, like the walls were listening, like the house had just stopped whispering when I opened the door. And I told myself it was just age, creaks, wind, would rot, and nothing else. So I unpacked, settled in, and ignored the strange design of the place, how the layout didn't quite make sense, how there were too many corners that led to nowhere and closets built into walls at unnatural heights. And on the second night, I heard something tapping in the attic above me, light at first, like the slow drip of water, but growing faster, sharper, like nails drumming on old wood. And when I opened the attic hatch, I found nothing but old boxes and darkness and the smell of iron and rot, and a single shoe resting on a dustless patch of floor. But I convinced myself again that it was animals, wind, tricks of the mind. But that night I dreamed of the house breathing, of it expanding and contracting like a lung, its walls wet and pulsing. And when I woke up, my sheets were damp with sweat or something colder and thicker, and the lights were all off despite leaving everyone on. And my phone battery was drained, showing static on screen, just pulsing static like it had tuned into a dead frequency. And I sat in the silence of that house trying to feel rational until I noticed the smell again, the sharp, meaty copper tang coming from behind the bookshelf. And when I moved it, I found a door I hadn't noticed before, smaller than any normal doorway, built low into the wall like a tunnel for something crawling. And even though every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, I felt drawn to it, pulled, like it was calling me by name, but not with sound, with thought. And I opened it to find a set of stairs spiraling down into a darkness that felt alive, and the smell grew stronger, and the walls were slick and warm. And I told myself I was dreaming, but I wasn't. And I went down into the house's gut where the walls bent inward and the stairs gave way to soil and bone and shapes I couldn't understand, carved into the earth like ancient sigils, symbols that moved when I looked at them too long. And I turned to leave but couldn't remember which way I came. And when I finally emerged, I wasn't where I started. I was in a different room, deeper in the house than should have existed. And in that room was a table, and on the table was a book bound in hide, breathing slightly, with no title. Only a lock that had already opened. And when I touched it, I saw things that weren't mine, memories that didn't belong to me, images of rituals and blood and mouths opening in the sky, and the sound of something beneath the dirt screaming. Not in pain, but in joy. And I threw the book down and ran until I found the kitchen again. And the clock said only 1 minute had passed, though it had felt like hours. And from then on, the house changed every night. Doors moved, windows vanished. Mirrors showed me sleeping when I was awake. And on the 4th day, I found my name carved into the floor under the rug in a handwriting that wasn't mine but resembled it. And the taps in the attic became footsteps, and the lights flickered not randomly but in a pattern. And the deeper I looked into the house, the more I found it wasn't just a home. It was a container, a prison, a skin stretched over something older, something not meant to be woken. And I started hearing my uncle's voice calling from behind walls, begging, crying, laughing, shifting between tones like a broken tape, saying he made a mistake, saying he opened it and now it won't close, and that the house was never his but was always its, and that it wanted someone younger, someone curious, someone who could see. And I realized he hadn't left me this house out of kindness. He left it as a trade, as a trap. And on the 6th night, the shadows started moving on their own, not just tricks of light, but real, reaching, grasping. And I locked myself in the bathroom only to find the walls breathing again, this time exhaling words in the mirror. Below us waits the original thirst, and I knew it wasn't just the house, but something under it, something growing. And when I tried to leave, I found the front door led back to the basement, and the windows showed only stone, and every room I entered led back to the room with the book, and every time I returned the book was more open, more alive, whispering through the pages with a voice that sounded like my mother's, my own, the wind, the wood, the screams of animals being born, and I broke down, fell to my knees and begged something, anything for escape, and the house answered by showing me a window again. And I leapt through it into freezing air only to land in the same kitchen again, over and over, until I stopped running and listened. And when I listened, it showed me the truth, that it had always been there, not the house, but what lived under it, before it, above time and shape, feeding on memory and lineage and bloodline. And I was chosen not by my uncle, but by the thing he had disturbed, and the only way out was through. So I opened the book fully and read, and felt it enter me like a second skin, and I understood every whisper I'd ever heard, every shadow I'd ever ignored, and I walked down into the ground one last time, into the root chamber where the walls became flesh, and the ceiling blinked, and the floor pulsed, and the altar waited. And I lay down upon it and saw that my body was just a vessel, a shell made for a mouth to wear, and the last thing I heard was my own voice, saying thank you. And I woke up weeks later in a hospital in Boston with no memory of how I got there, with dirt under my nails and a key around my neck I'd never seen. And when they told me my uncle had died in 1986 and his house had burned down decades ago, I didn't say a word. I just smiled and thanked them and went back to my apartment. Because the house still calls to me in dreams, and I still hear the book whispering from my bookshelf even though I burned it. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see a version of myself standing slightly behind, not copying me, just waiting. And one day it'll step forward and take over again, and I won't fight it, because the thirst is still there, the door is still open, and once the house has you, you never really leave, you just carry it inside you, room by room, until you are no longer the guest, but the foundation. Story 19. I never believed in curses or haunted land, or the kind of whispered stories old people tell in gas stations near the edge of forgotten towns, until I spent a week in a village that no longer appears on any map. A place my brother found on a whim during one of our spontaneous road trips, a crumbling dot of civilization buried somewhere in the forests of northern Pennsylvania, where the trees seem to grow too close to the road and the light fades faster than it should. In the moment we passed the rusted signpost that only read sorrow, something felt wrong, not dramatic like thunder or screams, just a quiet wrongness that settled in the air like a fog. A wrongness we didn't talk about because we were both too proud and too tired to admit how badly we wanted to turn around. And the village was small, barely a dozen houses, all old, weathered, the wood swollen with moisture and roofs sagging like tired backs. And yet there were people, not many, but they watched us with wide eyes and closed mouths, never waving, never speaking, just standing still like portraits brought to life. And we found a place to stay at a bed and breakfast that looked like it had been built before the Civil War and never updated. And the woman who ran it was pale and slow-moving and spoke with a voice like cracked leaves, telling us there was no cell signal, no working internet, and no one left after dark, not even the animals. And when I asked why, she only smiled and said, "The woods remember," which I thought was some weird local saying until the third night when we heard something moving outside our window, not walking, not running, but dragging, like a body or a chain or a limb too long to lift. And we told ourselves it was just an animal, maybe a deer or raccoon, until we saw the scratch marks the next morning on the siding below the window, deep and wide and almost systematic, like someone or something had been tracing symbols with claws. And on the fourth day, my brother disappeared, not dramatically, no sound, no scream, just gone between breakfast and lunch, his shoes still by the door, his wallet still on the table. And when I asked the villagers, no one would look at me, no one would answer. Not even the old woman who now locked the front door at all times and started whispering when she thought I was asleep. And I wandered through the village, house to house, asking questions, looking for him. But the further I searched, the more I realized the streets were looping, repeating. Like no matter which turn I took, I always ended back at the same well in the center of town, a moss-covered stone circle that seemed to pulse in the corner of my vision. And I started dreaming of the well, every night more vivid, until I could hear something inside it breathing, wet and slow, not quite animal and not quite human. And when I finally looked inside, I didn't see water. I saw eyes, hundreds of them, round and lidless, staring up at me with hunger and memory and silence. And I ran out of the village and into the woods, thinking I could make it to the car, to a highway, to somewhere with lights and people and noise. But the woods were wrong, growing tighter the more I walked, the trees twisting to block my path, branches bending against the wind to brush my skin. And I walked in circles for hours until I collapsed and opened my eyes to find myself not in the woods, but in the bed and breakfast again. The same bed, the same time, as if the forest had rejected me and brought me back like something half digested. And the old woman was there, standing in the doorway, whispering again, but this time I understood her words. The woods remember, the woods remember, the woods remember what was taken. And she handed me a piece of paper, yellow and brittle and stained with something dark, and on it was a drawing, a map of the village. But the streets were bones, and the well was a mouth, and beneath it all were tunnels, winding and spiraling into the earth like veins. And she told me if I wanted my brother back, I had to go into the tunnels and give the mouth something it hasn't had in a long time. And when I asked what she meant, she only said, "You." And I refused at first, locked myself in the room. But the house shifted that night, the walls cracking with noise like distant thunder, the hallway stretching into black. And from somewhere in the dark, I heard my brother's voice calling me, not begging, not scared, just saying my name over and over like a chant. And I followed it, down into the basement I hadn't noticed before, into a trapdoor beneath a rug, and then down a spiral staircase of stone slick with moss and blood and things I didn't want to name, until I reached the tunnels. And the smell hit me, wet rot and old iron and something sweet like spoiled fruit. And I walked for what felt like hours until I came to the heart, a chamber wider than anything should be underground, and in the center was the well again. Only this time upside down, hanging from the ceiling like a throat reaching down, and below it was my brother, suspended in air, eyes wide, limbs bent wrong, but breathing, somehow. And the voice came then, not from him, not from the tunnel, but from inside my own head, deep and thick and ancient, saying trade. And I felt my skin go cold, my mind go distant, like I was being hollowed out. And I said no, screamed it, ran back through the tunnels, chased by the sound of laughter that shook the bones in the walls. And I burst out of the trapdoor to find the house gone, the village silent, everything covered in dust like no one had lived there for 100 years. And I walked the road until someone picked me up. And when I got home, no one believed me, not the police, not our family. And all records of the village were gone, erased, like it never existed. But I know what I saw, and I know the woods remember, because every night I still dream of them, of that well, and of my brother's voice. And sometimes it's not just in dreams. I hear him when the house is quiet, calling my name from inside the walls, and the shadows stretch toward me when I walk too close. And sometimes I wake up with mud on my feet and symbols carved into my hands and the taste of earth in my mouth. And I don't remember walking, I don't remember leaving. But I know that one day the woods will come back for me, or I'll go back to them. Because the trade wasn't denied, only delayed, and the thing beneath the ground still waits with my brother in its grasp, and my name in its throat, whispering, always whispering, that I was chosen, and it never forgets. Story 20. I still can't shake the feeling that the house was never meant for me, that something about it, something dark and lingering in its bones, was watching me even when I thought I was alone, even as the sun dipped behind the trees and the shadows stretched longer, twisting across the walls, as if the very air I breathed had become charged with an oppressive weight, and with each step, every creaking floorboard seemed to echo in the silence like a warning, like something was waiting just behind me. just out of view, yet I could feel it there, almost tangible in its malevolence. And even though I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, that the house had stood for over a century without ever causing harm, I couldn't deny the cold, creeping unease that settled in my chest every time I entered that damned place. And that feeling only grew stronger as days passed, until I started hearing whispers, soft, barely audible sounds like a distant murmur of voices always at the edge of my hearing, just on the other side of the wall, just behind the door. And when I pressed my ear against the wood, the whispers would stop, leaving behind only the silence, thick and suffocating, so thick that it seemed to press against my very skin, as though the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating me. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more intense it became, until one night, as I lay in bed, a soft, almost imperceptible sound began to drift into my room, a soft scratching noise, like someone was dragging its nails along the floorboards of the hallway just outside my door. And I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, and I wanted to get up, to check, but my body refused to obey, frozen in place, paralyzed by the terror that gripped me. And it was then that I saw it, a shadow, no more than a flicker in the dim light, darting across the hallway, just out of sight, and it moved with an unnatural speed, as if it didn't belong to the house, as if it had slipped in from some other place, some other time. And my pulse quickened as I lay there, wondering if I had imagined it, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. And the next morning, I checked the hallway, but there was nothing, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. Just the same creaky floorboards and dust-covered furniture. But the whispers didn't stop, they only grew louder, more insistent, until one night, as I sat in the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the old, cracked mirror above the sink, something that didn't belong, a figure standing just behind me, its outline blurry and shifting, like it was trying to hide itself from my view. And I spun around, heart in my throat, but again, there was nothing, just the cold emptiness of the room staring back at me. And as I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks, I heard the whisper again, clearer this time, unmistakable, a voice. No, not a voice, but a rasping, gurgling sound like something choking on its own breath. And I turned back to the mirror, desperately trying to focus on the reflection, hoping it was all just a trick of the light. But the figure was still there, a pale, twisted form that seemed to hover just beyond the glass. And as I stared at it, I felt a chill crawl up my spine, the air thick with the scent of decay. And for the first time, I realized that it wasn't just the house that was haunted, it was me. Something had latched onto me, something had followed me, and the thought made my stomach turn. But I couldn't leave, not now, not when everything had already started to unravel, when the house had begun to take root in my mind. And so I stayed, night after night, each one worse than the last. As the whispers grew louder and the shadowy figure moved closer, until it felt like it was breathing down my neck, its presence so close that I could almost feel the weight of it pressing against my skin, its cold fingers brushing the back of my neck. And the thought of running was a fleeting one, because deep down, I knew that wherever I went, whatever I did, it would follow. And it wasn't until the door opened on its own, the creak of the hinges almost deafening in the dead silence of the house, that I realized how much I had underestimated the thing in the house. Because it wasn't content with just whispers, it wasn't content with simply watching, it was hungry, and I had been the one feeding it all this time. And as I turned to face the door, the last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was the figure standing there, finally fully revealed, its eyes hollow and dark, its mouth stretched wide in a grotesque grin, its limbs too long, too thin, twisting unnaturally at odd angles, and I screamed. But it was too late. The thing had already consumed me, swallowed me whole, and now, as I stand here, in the same house, I can't remember when I stopped being the one inside it, when I became the thing that haunts it, the whispers now, my own, the cold touch of the shadows my constant companion, as the house waits, ever patient, for its next victim, for the next soul foolish enough to believe that they can escape. Story 21. It started innocently enough, as these things always do, with a house that seemed too perfect for me, A quiet little cottage on the outskirts of town that no one seemed to want. A place abandoned by time, with peeling paint and cracked windows, yet it had an undeniable charm that drew me in despite the odd sense of unease that settled in the pit of my stomach the moment I set foot inside. A feeling I couldn't explain but couldn't ignore either, and so I ignored it, brushing aside the odd cold. Drafts that seemed to come from nowhere. The strange way the floorboards creaked underfoot as if the house itself was alive and watching, waiting, and at first, it was just the usual. Nights spent alone with the wind howling outside, the occasional scraping of branches against the windows, and the soft hum of the refrigerator running in the kitchen. But as the days passed, I began to notice little things. The way the lights flickered at odd times, like some electrical malfunction, or the way the mirrors in the house would sometimes reflect things that weren't there, like faint shapes in the corner of my eye, figures that would vanish when I turned to look directly, and I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks. But then came the noises, soft thuds in the walls, like something was moving inside, scraping, shuffling, and at night, when I lay in bed, I could hear faint whispering, as if someone was speaking just beyond my reach, too low to make out the words. But the tone was unmistakable, a guttural rasping sound that made my skin crawl, and yet when I investigated, there was never anyone there, just empty rooms and silence that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. And that was when the dreams began, nightmares so vivid and real that I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, as if I had lived them. As if the horrors were not just figments of my imagination, but something far more sinister, and each night the dreams grew darker. Twisted, contorted shapes, black figures with hollow eyes, moving just out of my reach, calling my name in voices that echoed in my mind long after I had awoken, and I began to feel as though I was losing my grip on reality, like I was no longer sure where the nightmares ended and the waking world began. And it wasn't just the dreams. It was the house itself, the way the air would grow thick with a musty, rancid odor in the middle of the night, a smell I couldn't place, like something decaying. And when I followed the scent, it always led me to the basement, a place I had avoided since I first moved in. But I couldn't help myself. I had to know. I had to find the source of the stench. So one night, trembling with dread, I descended into the darkness, the air growing colder with each step, the flickering light of my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. And as I reached the bottom, I saw something that made my blood run cold. An old wooden door, half open, a crack of light, seeping through from the other side. And I could hear it, the faint scratching, like something was moving on the other side. And before I could stop myself, I pushed the door open. And that's when I saw it. The walls of the room were covered in what appeared to be strange, twisted symbols etched into the wood. The floor littered with rotting books and broken furniture, and in the center of the room, a large, antique mirror stood, its glass cracked and clouded, but still reflecting something. No, someone standing just behind me, and I spun around, heart pounding in my chest, but no one was there, only the thick, oppressive air, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was watching me from the darkness. And as I turned back to the mirror, I saw it, just for a fraction of a second, something moving in the reflection, a dark shape, shifting just out of view, and my breath caught in my throat, my feet frozen in place. But then, as if some unseen force had taken hold of me, I found myself stepping closer to the mirror, my hand reaching out involuntarily, and the moment my fingers brushed against the cold glass, everything went black, a deafening silence filling the room, and for what felt like an eternity, I was weightless, suspended in some void, until the sound of distant whispering returned, louder now, clearer, and then the feeling of cold fingers wrapping around my wrist, pulling me toward the mirror, and when I looked into its depths, I saw myself, but not as I was. No, this was something else, something wrong. My reflection was twisted, distorted, with pale, hollow eyes and a smile that stretched too wide, too far, and as I screamed, the reflection moved on its own, mimicking my every move. But it didn't stop there. It reached out of the mirror, its bony fingers grasping at my throat. And in that moment, I realized that the house had never been empty. It had always been alive, feeding off the fear and torment of those who dared to stay, and it had claimed me, just as it had claimed the others before me. And now, trapped in the house with that thing that had once been me, I wait every night for the whispers to return, for the mirror to call my name. And I wonder, with a sickening certainty, how long it will be before it calls someone else, how long before the house feeds again, because I know now that it never lets go. It never lets you leave, not truly. Story 22. It began with an advertisement, just a simple ad, nestled in the back pages of the local paper, offering an old Victorian house for rent, far from the bustling city, surrounded by thick woods that no one dared to venture into. A house that promised solitude, peace, and everything I thought I needed after the noise of city life had worn me down. And though there was something unsettling about the house in the photograph, its crooked windows, the way the trees seemed to lean toward it like specters, I shrugged it off, assuming it was just the angle or the quality of the picture. But the moment I stepped foot inside, the air felt different, heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. And though the place seemed ordinary enough at first, with its creaking floors and peeling wallpaper, there was a constant unease that settled over me, a feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was watching. And at night, the sounds would begin, the floorboards above my head creaking in time with the rhythm of my own thoughts, faint tapping noises coming from the walls, as if something was moving inside them. And though I would always convince myself it was just the house settling, the strange feeling of being observed never left. Especially when I would sit at my desk to work, only to feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, like eyes were burning into me from the shadows. But when I turned around, the room was empty. And one day, as I was walking through the overgrown garden at the back of the house, I noticed something strange, a stone path, partially obscured by ivy, leading to a small, weathered door at the edge of the property, a door that looked completely out of place, its wood warped and cracked with age, and curiosity overtook me. So I tried to open it, but it was locked. And though I didn't think much of it, something inside me stirred, an instinctive sense that whatever lay behind that door was meant to stay hidden. And yet over the next few days, I found myself returning to it, pacing the garden late at night, hoping to hear the faintest creak of the door shifting, but it never did. And then, one night, I woke to the sound of something scraping against my bedroom window, slow, deliberate, and I froze, heart pounding in my chest, staring at the window in the dark, but there was nothing there, nothing I could see. And though I tried to shake off the fear, something in the pit of my stomach told me it wasn't over, that something was coming, something had already arrived. And the next morning, when I went to check the garden again, I found the door slightly ajar, and the moment I stepped inside, the air grew colder, heavier, as though the very atmosphere had shifted. And there, in the center of the room, lay a small, rusted key, an old-fashioned thing, with strange markings etched into its surface. And though I didn't know why, I felt compelled to pick it up, to take it with me. And as I turned to leave the room, I saw it, a figure, just out of the corner of my eye, standing at the far end of the garden, too tall and thin to be human, its face obscured by a hood. And I thought I saw its mouth move, as if it was speaking, but no sound reached me, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. But when I blinked, it was gone, vanishing into the trees like smoke. And I ran back to the house, clutching the key in my hand, only to find that the door was now locked, as though it had never been open at all. And from that night on, the house began to change. Subtle shifts at first, the doors opening on their own, the lights flickering even though the wiring was new. And I started to hear whispers, faint murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere. And when I would lie in bed at night, unable to sleep, I would hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving around the house. But when I would get up to check, there would be nothing but the unsettling silence, And the dreams, those horrible dreams, they became worse, vivid and grotesque, where I would walk through the garden, down that stone path, to the locked door, only to find that the key no longer worked, that the door was sealed shut by something far stronger than wood. And in those dreams, I would hear the whispers more clearly, and they would take shape, become voices, low and raspy, calling my name. And when I woke, I would be drenched in sweat, my heart racing, and it was as if the house was pressing in on me, suffocating me with each passing night. And then came the night I found the journal that had been hidden in the attic, buried beneath old boxes of forgotten things, its pages yellowed with age. And when I opened it, I saw the name written in the front, my own name, scrawled in a frantic hand. And as I read through the pages, my breath quickened, because the words seemed to describe me, my life, my thoughts, as if someone had been following me, had been inside my head all along. And the entries grew more erratic, more disturbed, as if the person who had written them was losing their grip on reality. And then I found it, the final entry, written in what looked like blood. The door is the key to everything. Don't go back. And before I could make sense of it, I heard a sound, a soft thud, from the attic doorway. And I turned to see the shadow of a figure standing at the top of the stairs, its shape indistinct, like it was only half there. And I could feel the air grow thick with something that wasn't quite fear, something older, deeper, and I knew, without a doubt, that it had been waiting for me, watching me all along, waiting for me to discover the key. And that was the moment I realized the house wasn't just a house, it was a trap, a prison, and I had been lured inside. But it wasn't the house that held me here. It was something else, something much older, something that had been buried beneath the house for years, maybe centuries, waiting for someone like me to come along. And as the figure in the doorway stepped closer, I saw its face, twisted and gaunt, with hollow eyes and a mouth that stretched too wide. And it smiled, and I knew then that the house had never been mine to own. It had always owned me, and now there was no escape. Story 23. I thought I was just looking for a quiet place to retreat to, away from the noise of the city, somewhere peaceful and isolated. So when I found the listing for the house in the small town just past the woods, I thought it was perfect. A cottage with a few acres of land, overgrown and tucked away in the middle of nowhere. It seemed like exactly what I needed, a fresh start. But when I arrived, the house was older than I expected, with ivy crawling up the walls and windows covered in grime. And though I hesitated for a moment, I pushed the uneasy feeling away, convinced it was just my nerves acting up, and stepped inside, the musty air inside hitting me immediately, the floor creaking beneath my feet as I explored the rooms, dust motes floating lazily in the sunlight that managed to filter through the thick curtains. The place felt like it had been abandoned for years, but something about it felt wrong, even in the stillness, like the house was holding its breath, watching me. And the more I explored, the more that feeling grew, especially when I entered the kitchen, where I saw the first of the oddities, the old sink that hadn't been touched in who knows how long. But the faucet was running, just a trickle, but it was enough to make my heart race, and I quickly turned it off. But the unease remained, gnawing at the back of my mind, and as night fell, I settled into a strange silence that seemed to envelop the house like a heavy blanket, the wind outside howling through the trees, but the house itself stood still, like it was holding its breath. And I thought I heard something then, a low, scraping sound from above, like something was moving in the attic. But when I went to investigate, there was nothing, just the empty space above me. And so I shrugged it off, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. And the next night, the sound came again, louder this time, unmistakable, like something or someone was moving in the attic, pacing. And though I wanted to ignore it, the instinct to check became overwhelming. So I grabbed a flashlight and climbed into the attic, my heart pounding in my chest as I crept through the dust and cobwebs. And at first, everything looked normal, just forgotten boxes and old furniture. But then I saw it, something strange in the corner, half hidden beneath a tarp, and when I pulled it away, my blood ran cold, because beneath it was an old, wooden chest, worn and faded, but it was the carvings on the surface that caught my eye. Twisted symbols, unfamiliar and menacing, like something ancient, something evil, and I instinctively backed away, my body screaming at me to leave, but my hands moved as if possessed, reaching toward the chest, and when I opened it, a chill swept through the attic, colder than the air outside, and inside the chest, there was nothing but a thick, black book, its cover cracked and worn, but when I opened it, the pages were filled with dark, handwritten text, the ink smeared and faded, and there was a name at the top of the first page, my name, written in what looked like blood, and as I stared at it, I felt a presence behind me, something watching from the shadows, and I turned, my breath catching in my throat as I saw nothing but the darkness. But I felt it then, the weight of 1,000 eyes on me, and when I turned back to the book, it was no longer empty. On the page were words, written in a language I didn't understand, but I could feel them seeping into my mind, scratching at the edges of my sanity, and the air grew thicker, suffocating, and then the whispers started, low and guttural, coming from all directions, as if the house itself was alive, and I dropped the book, my heart racing as I scrambled to the stairs. But when I reached the bottom, the door to the attic slammed shut, and the entire house seemed to groan, like it was alive, like it was waking up, and I ran out of the house, my mind reeling with the images I had seen. But when I reached the yard, I saw something that made my blood freeze, a figure standing at the edge of the woods, tall and dark, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the night, and before I could move, it stepped into the shadows and disappeared, and I couldn't bring myself to leave, not yet, not when I could feel the house calling me, pulling me back inside, and I went to bed that night with my mind racing, unable to sleep, knowing something was coming, something I couldn't escape. And in the dead of night, I heard it again, the soft scratching, now coming from inside the walls, and it wasn't just the walls. The floorboards creaked, the lights flickered, and I felt it again, that presence, something closing in on me. And when I turned to face the door, it was there, something on the other side, its shape shifting like smoke, but it had eyes, glowing eyes, and its mouth opened, but no sound came out. And then I heard the whispers again, clearer now, filling my head with words I couldn't understand. And the lights flickered one last time before going out, plunging the house into total darkness. And I felt a cold, clammy hand grip my shoulder, and before I could scream, everything went black. And when I woke, I was no longer in the bed. I was on the floor of the attic, and the book was in my hands again, and the whispering was louder, more urgent. But there was no escape, no way out, and I could feel it. The house had claimed me, and I was no longer just a visitor, no longer just a tenant. I was a part of it, a part of whatever it had become, and every night now, I hear the whispers, and I know they are calling to me, waiting for me to finally understand what the house wants. And the worst part is, I can feel myself changing, like something inside me is waking up, something ancient and hungry. And I know it won't be long before I'm no longer me, before I'm just another part of the house, another whisper in the dark. Story 24. I was staying at my grandfather's old house, the one that had been in the family for generations, a decaying place at the edge of the woods. Its tall windows always seemed to reflect something strange, a shifting darkness beyond the trees. Like the forest itself was alive and waiting, and I could never quite shake the feeling that there was something watching me, lurking in the corners of every room, as if the house itself were aware of my presence and angry that I had returned. But it wasn't. Until the third night, when I woke to a sound I couldn't place, something soft, like whispering, only faint enough to make me question whether I had heard it at all, but it was the kind of sound that gnawed at the back of your mind. The kind that made you pull the covers up to your chin and pretend it wasn't happening, until I heard it again, clearer this time, coming from the hallway outside my room, and my heart began to race as I held my breath, afraid that if I moved, whatever was out there would notice me, and I lay still, eyes wide in the dark, trying to convince myself it was just the wind, or maybe the house settling, until the whispering turned into something else, something guttural, like an animal growling low in its throat. And I could feel the cold air shift around me, a chill that crawled beneath my skin. So I crept to the window, hoping for a glimpse of something that would explain the noise. But when I pulled the curtains back, I found nothing but the dense blackness of the forest pressing in, the trees barely moving in the wind, and the sky was empty, no stars, no moon, just an overwhelming void. And I thought for a moment that I had imagined the whole thing, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me in the silence. But when I turned back to the room, I saw it, a shape in the corner, just out of the corner of my eye, something standing motionless by the door, its presence so chilling I froze, unable to move or even breathe. And it was then I heard it. Again, the low growl, louder now. And I realized with sudden horror that it wasn't just a sound, it was something waiting for me, something that had been there all along, hidden in the shadows, feeding off the fear that had been growing inside me since I first arrived. And as the minutes dragged on, the air grew heavier, more oppressive, until the silence shattered with a loud crash, like something large had fallen downstairs, and I ran to the hallway, my heart pounding, adrenaline surging through me. But there was nothing there, only the smell of damp earth and rotting wood, and I was about to turn back when I saw it, out of the corner of my eye again. But this time it was closer, standing at the foot of the stairs, its features obscured by the darkness, but I could feel its eyes on me, burning with an intensity that made my skin crawl, and it started to move, not in any normal way, but with a strange, jerky motion, as if it wasn't fully connected to the world around it. And I knew then that whatever it wasn't human, or even alive in any sense that I could understand. And as it advanced, my legs betrayed me, locking up in terror, unable to move, and I thought I was going to die right there in that house. But then a memory flashed into my mind, something my grandfather had said long ago about the family's curse, how every generation would face something that would come from the woods, something ancient, something that had been there long before us, feeding off the fear of anyone who dared step foot on the land. And I realized with growing dread that this creature wasn't just a haunting, it was part of the house, part of the curse, and it would never let me leave. And the growling grew louder, more frantic, as though it was trying to get closer. And I thought about running, but my body wouldn't respond. And that's when I saw it, the twisted, gnarled face of the creature, half hidden in the shadows, eyes like pits of black tar, and its mouth was open, stretching impossibly wide, revealing rows of teeth that looked more like jagged rocks than anything that belonged in a human mouth. And as it reached out for me, its long fingers curling like claws, I thought I saw something else behind it. A flash of movement in the dark, something larger, darker, with eyes glowing like burning embers. And I could hear it now, its heavy breathing, its massive form blocking the doorway. And I realized that there was more than one of them, and they had come for me, and I couldn't escape, couldn't move, couldn't even scream. And the last thing I remember was the sharp pain in my chest as one of the creature's claws sank into me. And I woke up hours later, blood on my hands and the taste of dirt in my mouth. My body cold and stiff, lying on the floor of my grandfather's house, the whispers now gone, replaced by an eerie silence. But when I looked around, nothing was as it should be. Everything was in place, but it felt wrong, like the world had shifted just slightly out of alignment, and I was no longer certain of what was real and what wasn't. And that's when I heard the whispering again, faint at first, but growing louder, coming from all around me. And I realized with a sinking feeling that I was never going to leave, that the house had claimed me, just like it had claimed my ancestors before me. And I wasn't sure whether I was still alive or whether the creatures had already taken me, but I felt them close, just outside my reach. Always waiting, always watching, as the whispers continued to grow louder, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket, until I could hear nothing else. And I understood then, in the deepest part of my soul, that I would never escape. And I was just another piece of the curse, another part of the house's story. And all I could do was wait as the darkness closed in, the whispers becoming a roar in my ears, and everything around me faded to black. Story 25. It had been years since I'd last been to the old house, the one my grandparents had lived in, perched on the edge of the dense forest that no one dared to venture into after dark, the place I had spent countless summers as a child, and even then. Something had always felt off about it, the air too still, too thick, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something, and as I pulled up to the long-forgotten driveway that had been overtaken by weeds, the house still stood tall in the distance, its windows like dark eyes watching, unblinking, and as I stepped out of the car, the silence hit me hard, deeper than I remembered, and the house seemed to groan under its own weight, as if it recognized me and wanted nothing more than to swallow me whole. But I had to go inside, the memories dragging me forward despite the sinking dread. And the moment I stepped over the threshold, the smell of decay hit me like a physical blow, a mixture of mold, rotting wood, and something far worse, something metallic, as though blood had soaked into the floorboards, and the doors slammed shut behind me, and I stood there for a long moment, waiting, but nothing happened, so I gathered myself and made my way through the dark, narrow hallway. The floors creaking beneath my feet like they were alive, protesting every step I took, and as I passed the kitchen, I couldn't help but glance inside, where I noticed the sink was filled with something black, moving, slithering. But when I stepped closer to investigate, it stopped, perfectly still, and I quickly backed away, my heart hammering in my chest, and I hurried up the stairs, thinking that maybe if I reached the safety of the second floor, I could make sense of what was happening. But as soon as I reached the landing, the temperature dropped, the air grew thick with something heavy, suffocating, and a low, distant sound started to echo through the walls, like something was scraping against the floor, or perhaps dragging itself across the ceiling, and I froze, listening, my skin prickling, and it was then that I saw it, standing at the end of the hall in the shadowed doorway of my grandparents' old bedroom. The figure was tall, too tall, its outline barely visible in the darkness, but it was there, and as it stepped forward, its movements were jerky, unnatural, like it wasn't fully connected to the world, and I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move, my body frozen with terror, and as the figure came closer, I saw its face, or what was left of it, its skin hanging loose, its eyes wide and empty, and its mouth, oh God, its mouth was stretched too wide, impossibly wide, full of jagged teeth that clattered together like broken glass, and I realized, with an overwhelming sense of dread, that this wasn't just a person, or even something human. This was something far older, far darker, something that had been waiting for me, waiting for anyone foolish enough to set foot in that cursed house. And before I could turn to flee, it lunged, its hands, long and bony, grabbing hold of my shoulders, and I felt something cold and wet press against my skin, like ice, like death, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't move, and the world around me went dark, a suffocating darkness that pressed in from all sides, until I felt myself being pulled downward, deeper, and I could hear it then, that voice, soft but unmistakable, whispering in my ear, telling me I was never leaving, that I was part of the house now, a permanent fixture in its twisted history, and I struggled, fought against the cold hands, but they tightened their grip, dragging me further into the shadows, and I tried to look up, but all I saw was the thing's face again, its eyes wide and hollow, its mouth gaping as if to devour me whole, and then the ground beneath me gave way, and I fell, deeper and deeper, into the heart of the house, into the very bowels of the earth, and the whispering grew louder, filling my head, drowning out everything else, until I felt my body slam against something hard, the ground, cold and unforgiving, and I struggled to sit up, gasping for air, but when I opened my eyes, I was in the basement, or what was left of it. The walls were cracked, covered in black mold, and the floor was littered with old bones, bones that looked like they had been there for decades, centuries even, and the air smelled like rotting flesh, and I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that I was no longer in the world I had known, that I had crossed some unseen threshold into something far worse, a place where time didn't exist, a place where the house itself was alive, and I realized that the whispers were no longer just in my head. They were all around me, coming from every direction, from the walls, the floors, the ceiling, and I heard them speak my name over and over again, like a chant. And then I saw it, more figures, more of them, emerging from the darkness, crawling out from the shadows, their eyes glowing in the dim light, their mouths stretching into grotesque smiles as they closed in on me. And I knew in that moment, deep down in my bones, that there was no escape, that I had become a part of this place, that I would be here forever. And as the figures surrounded me, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, and the darkness closed in around me, consuming me whole, until all I could hear was the whispers, and all I could feel was the cold. And I understood that this was my fate now, that I would never leave, never see the light of day again, and that the house had claimed me, just as it had claimed so many others before me. And I felt my body begin to change, to become like them, like the shadows that had taken root in the corners of the house. And I was no longer afraid, for I knew I was a part of something far older, far darker, something that would never let me go. And I surrendered to it, to the darkness that had been waiting all along. And as I closed my eyes, I heard the final whisper, a soft, satisfied sound, and then nothing. Story 26. I never told anyone what happened that winter when I took a job as a night security guard at the old hospital slated for demolition. The one abandoned for over 2 decades after the fire in the West Wing killed a dozen patients and scattered the rest into the night like frightened insects. The one people in town still crossed the street to avoid. Not because they believed in ghosts, but because something about that place just didn't sit right in the bones, something cold and old and watching. But I needed the money after my last job fell through and the foreclosure notice was tacked to my apartment door. And the idea of doing nothing more than walking silent halls for 10 hours a night seemed like a bargain. Even if the electricity was spotty and most of the building was off limits, crumbling walls, collapsed ceilings, lead dust thick as ash coating the floor like gray snow. And on the first night, nothing happened aside from a few rats scuttling in the vents and a door that creaked. For no reason, but by the second night, I started to feel something, a heaviness in the halls near the burned-out West Wing, as if the air itself thickened, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. And when I walked past the elevator shaft, long rusted and sealed off, I swear I heard it hum like it was still alive, cables taut and twitching behind the walls. And by the third night, I started hearing footsteps that didn't belong to me echoing down the main corridor, soft and shuffling, the sound of bare feet dragging slowly across tile. And when I called out, thinking it might be a squatter or addict, the sound stopped instantly, and the lights in the hallway flickered, and for a moment I saw someone, standing at the end of the corridor in a hospital gown soaked black at the hem, too far to see clearly, but not far enough for me to doubt it was real. And then it was gone, as if it had never been there, just a trick of shadows, I told myself, or my mind playing games. But that night I dreamed of fire, not normal fire, but black flames that moved like oil and climbed the walls in silence while people screamed and thrashed behind locked doors, their mouths open wide but making no sound. And I woke up gasping, sweating, and with the strong smell of antiseptic in my nostrils though I was home. And things got worse after that. On the 5th night, the static in the radio crackled into speech when I passed the ICU ward, a voice whispering numbers that didn't make sense, until I wrote them down and realized they matched the patient IDs on the wall-mounted board by the nurse's station, IDs I had never seen before and which weren't in the logbook, as if someone or something was reminding me they had existed once. And that same night, the camera feeds in the security office glitched and looped back to show me footage from decades ago, grainy black and white clips of patients stumbling down the hallways, bumping into walls, collapsing as smoke poured in through the vents, and the overhead lights pulsed like heartbeats. And the footage cut off right before they all turned to the camera at once and began to scream, though there was no sound, only the sound of my own breath, heavy and fast, echoing in the small office as the air turned freezing cold, and I could see my breath curling in the air like smoke. And on the 7th night, I stopped trying to explain it all away, stopped pretending I was just tired or stressed, or that there were logical explanations. For the smell of charred skin that hung in the stairwells, or the way the fire alarm went off exactly at 3:17 a.m. every night even though the system had been disabled years ago. And I finally asked the day supervisor if anything strange had ever happened to him, but he just looked at me too long and too quiet before finally muttering that he never worked nights, never went near the basement, and that if I was smart I wouldn't either. But it was already too late because I'd already been down there. On night 4, when I heard the crying coming from behind the old supply room door, and even though I knew it couldn't be real, I still opened it, and inside there was nothing but an old gurney and black mold covering the walls, but the crying didn't stop. It just moved further down the hall, leading me into the old morgue where I found the drawers rusted shut and the lights too dim to see properly, and when I turned around to leave, the door had closed and wouldn't budge, and that's when I felt the breath on the back of my neck, ice cold and slow, and something whispered stay, so close to my ear I felt the wet of its lips, and I bolted, shouldering the door open with all my strength. Running through the hallways with flickering lights above me strobing like a dying heartbeat, and that's when I realized I'd lost track of time. What I thought was 15 minutes had actually been 3 hours, and the clock in the guard room was spinning slowly backwards. And from that night on, the building began to change, subtly at first, the layout not matching the blueprints, new rooms appearing where none existed before, windows showing endless darkness outside even in daytime, and the shadows no longer waited for me to turn around. They moved in plain sight, long and thin and twitching at the edges of the halls, and sometimes I'd see the walls breathe, gently expanding and contracting like lungs, and every time I walked past the old operating theater, the lights inside flicked on by themselves, revealing the surgical table with restraints still stained deep reddish brown and tools laid out perfectly, like someone still used them. And on the 10th night, I found writing on the walls in red grease pencil, patient notes scrawled in frantic, looping handwriting that talked about the black room, and the man behind the mirror, and the endless mouth under the floor. And when I came back with my phone to take pictures, it was gone, every wall clean, no trace of the words or even the dust that had coated them. And that's when I started keeping my own notes, trying to map the place out. But every time I drew a new floor plan, the halls didn't match. Doors led to rooms that hadn't been there before. Staircases descended more steps than should be possible, and some ended at walls that hummed like they were hiding something on the other side, something alive. And then the dreams came every night. Not dreams exactly, but memories that didn't belong to me. Dreams where I was strapped to a gurney, wheeled into a firelit room full of masks, where people stared down at me with faces that slid like melting wax and asked me questions in languages I couldn't understand, while metal tools were pressed into my chest and insects crawled from my mouth as I screamed. And I woke up each time with a new bruise, a new scratch, and once, something small and sharp in my mouth, a tooth, not mine, blackened and cracked like it had been pulled from a corpse. And on the 12th night I stopped patrolling, locked myself in the guard room, and kept the lights on and the door bolted. But even that didn't help because the monitor still showed movement in the old burn ward, the same figure again and again, standing at the end of the hallway, then closer still, until it was right at the lens, its face a ruin of melted flesh and hollow eyes, and then it vanished. But I could feel it behind me, and I turned and nothing was there, but the air smelled like burnt cloth and singed hair, and I could hear something drip, drip, dripping down onto the floor. And on the 13th night, the last night, I think I lost part of myself because something changed in me when I opened the locker and found my own name etched inside in handwriting I didn't recognize, next to a photograph of me at the front desk from decades ago, yellowed and faded and clearly printed long before I was born. And when I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the eyes staring back, too sunken, too hollow. And I heard the voice again behind me, not whispering this time, but speaking clearly, coldly, telling me that I was never hired, that there was no record of my employment, that I had always been here, and always would be. And when I ran to leave, to flee into the cold morning light, I found the doors bricked over from the inside, no sign they had ever opened, and the sky outside was black, stars unmoving, and the forest was gone, replaced by a sea of fog that pressed against the windows like it wanted to get in. And now I sit in the guard office, night after night, watching cameras that show nothing but empty rooms slowly filling with shadows, and sometimes I see myself in them, walking the halls with a blank stare, dragging something behind me that I can't quite see, and I wonder which of us is real now, and which is just the memory of someone who thought they were only here for the night shift. Story 27. I never should have gone back to the house where my brother disappeared because I knew, deep in the part of my mind I keep locked up behind smiles and polite conversations, that the walls had swallowed him and that the floors still echoed with the way he screamed that last night. The night I ran instead of helped. The night I slammed the door shut on the thing I couldn't see but felt in the blackness just beyond the hallway light. The night I told everyone I didn't know what happened, that I was asleep, that he must have snuck out. But I knew he hadn't because I saw the hallway go dark like ink spilling from the ceiling down. And I heard the thumping sound like wet meat slapping tile. And I heard him call my name once, just once, before the silence fell so hard it made my ears ring. And I waited all these years, pretending it never happened, pretending the dreams weren't real, pretending I didn't hear scratching behind the walls at night, pretending that every shadow didn't look like a hand reaching out, until the call came that the house was finally being torn down and some part of me, broken or guilty or desperate, drove 400 miles just to stand in front of it again, thinking maybe I'd see him in a window, maybe I'd hear that last cry again and this time not run. But the house didn't look ruined. It looked untouched, perfectly preserved like something waiting under glass. And when I walked up to the doorknob was warm like breath had just left it. And even though I knew the place had been sealed for years, it opened smooth. No creak, no dust, just the smell of wet wood and mold and the sour sting of old rot. And the second I stepped inside, it all came rushing back. The cold draft that moves without wind, the low hum that vibrates under the floorboards, the way every room is 1 degree too narrow, like the house was built wrong on purpose, to confuse you, to make you feel like something's behind you even when you know there's not. And I stepped into the hallway where I last saw him. The walls still stained faintly with something too dark to be rust and too old to be blood. And I swear the floorboards pulsed, just once, like a heart buried deep under the foundation had flinched at my return. And I told myself I'd stay only a minute, that I'd just walk through and leave. But the second I reached the stairs, they were longer than I remembered. The landing seemed to stretch further away as I climbed, and with each step the light from outside grew dimmer until it vanished altogether, like the house had closed its mouth behind me. And upstairs the hallway was wrong, twisted just slightly, so the walls leaned inward, and the doors looked taller and thinner, and the air was so thick it felt like walking through water. And one of the doors, my old bedroom door, was cracked open, and I swear I saw someone standing behind it. But when I pushed it open, there was nothing. Only the bed covered in the same bed sheets I'd left behind, stained yellow with time and something else I didn't want to name. And in the far corner, the closet door creaked slowly open, not all at once, but inch by inch, and the dark inside looked too deep, too wide. And I heard the sound again, the thump, the wet meat slap of something dragging itself across wood, and my legs moved before I could stop them, back into the hall, toward my brother's room. And I saw the door at the end, his door, swollen and rotting, but open, and inside, the smell was unbearable, like something old and wet and buried in hot earth. And the window in his room didn't look outside. It looked into another hallway, one I didn't recognize, dim and lined with doors, and I watched as a figure walked across it, slow and stuttering, its body wrong, too long in the limbs and too short in the torso. And I backed away, stumbling into the hall, and suddenly I could hear the house breathing, slow and deep and hungry. And I tried to run, I swear I tried, but the floor bent under me and the hallway shifted, and I realized the walls weren't walls. They were skin, stretched tight and pulsing and covered in hair-thin cracks that wept something dark. And I screamed, but the sound didn't echo. It was swallowed, devoured by the thing that lived in the crawl spaces and under the floors and in the attic where the boards were always damp even in summer. And I felt the air shift again, like something was behind me, and I turned and saw it. What was left of him, my brother, or the thing that had worn his shape. His eyes were black, not just the iris but the whole eye, glistening and wide and full of hate and hunger and silence. And his mouth hung open like it had been unhinged, filled with teeth not human, long and pointed and wet. And he spoke without speaking, the words hammering in my skull, not asking where I had been or why I left, but asking why I'd come back, why I'd woken the thing beneath us, the thing that fed on fear and memory and guilt. And I tried to back away, but his arms stretched longer than they should have, fingers thin and pale wrapping around my wrists like vines, pulling me toward the closet in his room, the one that never opened when we were kids, the one we never dared to knock on. And inside it the dark went down instead of back, a shaft like a throat-swallowing light. And I heard them then, all of them, the voices of the others, the ones who had vanished in this house over the years, all of them whispering not for help, but to hush, to be quiet, because the thing was close. And I fought and kicked and screamed, but the floorboards opened like a mouth, and my feet slipped through, and he let go, and I fell so far I forgot what falling felt like. And when I landed, I was somewhere that was not a basement, not a cellar, but a space between, made of stone and meat and noise, a place that echoed with old laughter and crying and the sound of water dripping onto something soft. And the walls were covered in photos of people I'd never seen, all of them with their eyes scratched out and their mouths missing. And I knew then that no one left this place whole, that even if I got out I'd be different, hollowed out, just a skin wrapped around a screen. And I stumbled through that darkness for what felt like days or hours or minutes. The clocks didn't work down there, and time felt like a lie. And finally, I found a staircase made of bone and wood and rope that led back up. But every step I took, I felt the house tremble, groan, angry that I was escaping, that I had seen too much. And when I burst out into daylight, if it was daylight, the sky was gray and flat and smelled like dust. And the house behind me was gone, not crumbled or burnt, just gone, the lot empty, the grass blackened. And I ran until my legs gave out. And when I got to a gas station and tried to tell them what happened, they looked at me like I was insane. And when I begged them to call someone, to check the property records, they told me there'd never been a house there, just a stretch of dead land fenced off for decades after the sinkhole swallowed half the block. And I told myself they were lying, that they had to be wrong. But when I looked it up online, there was nothing, no address, no record, like it had been erased. And now sometimes at night, I hear scratching in the walls again. And sometimes I see my brother in reflections that aren't mine. And the dreams are worse now, deeper, darker, more vivid. And in them I don't run, I follow. And I wake up with dirt under my fingernails and blood on my teeth and no memory of what I did while I was asleep. And I know, the house is still with me, inside me, and that someday soon, when I've forgotten just enough, I'll go back without meaning to, and this time it won't let me leave at all. Story 28. They told me it was just an old farmhouse, the kind you see leaning sideways at the edge of a cornfield with peeling paint and a porch that groans under its own weight, abandoned but not forgotten, like something waiting with its eyes closed. And when my cousin Mark said he inherited it from our uncle who died alone in their last winter, I didn't think twice before agreeing to help him clean it out for sale, because I figured it would be a couple dusty afternoons and a few mice at worst. But I was wrong. So wrong that I still can't sleep without keeping the lights on or without checking my hands for splinters, even though they've long since healed. Because when we got there, the house didn't feel empty. It felt still, not just quiet, but a kind of listening silence, like something was just out of sight around every corner, and it was waiting for us to say something first. And it started before we even unlocked the door. When Mark noticed the front doorknob was cold to the touch even. Though it was July and the metal looked wet, like it was sweating, but it wasn't sweat. It was some kind of condensation from the inside, like there was a freezer behind it. And I laughed it off, even though my stomach tightened in a way I couldn't explain, like the time I stood too close to the tracks when a train passed and felt the rumble inside my ribs. And when the door creaked open, the air that poured out wasn't musty or warm like I expected. It was frigid and smelled like soil, not fresh soil either, but that deep rot smell, wet and thick. And I remember Mark stopping in the doorway and whispering, "What the hell?" before stepping in like he couldn't help himself, like the smell was calling him. And I followed because I didn't want to be the only one outside, because the idea of being alone on that porch with my back to the cornfield suddenly felt worse than whatever was in the house. And the light inside was strange too. Not dark exactly, but like everything was dimmed by something you couldn't see, a kind of grayness that soaked into the wallpaper and floorboards. And even though we opened all the windows, the smell didn't leave and the cold didn't lift, and our breath started fogging. And I said maybe we should come back with heaters or something, but Mark said no. Let's just get it over with. And he started upstairs, and I stayed on the ground floor and poked around the living room, brushing aside cobwebs that seemed almost too thick, like strings instead of threads. And I remember seeing these scratches on the floor under the old sofa, deep and parallel, like something had been dragged across it over and over again. And then I heard Mark calling me, not shouting, just saying my name over and over in this strange tone, soft and fast, and almost robotic. And I climbed the stairs calling back, but he didn't answer, just kept saying my name like a loop. And when I got to the top, I couldn't tell where his voice was coming from anymore. It was everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off the walls like echoes in a cave. And I checked each room, opening doors one by one until I found the one with the attic pull-down ladder hanging open and a draft coming from above. And I yelled for him, but no answer. So I climbed up, even though every part of my body screamed not to. And the attic was wrong, just wrong, because it wasn't dusty or cluttered like I expected. It was almost empty except for a chair in the center, and all the insulation had been ripped out, exposing the wood beams, which were soaked black in spots like something had seeped through them. And sitting in the chair was Mark, or at least I thought it was, until I got closer and saw that his eyes were open but not blinking, his mouth moving like he was still calling my name, but no sound was coming out now. And I tried to shake him, but he was ice cold and stiff, and when I touched his shoulder, I swear it felt like bark, like his skin had roughened. And then I heard it, not his voice, but something else whispering in the walls, under the beams, beneath the floor, a low chittering sound like hundreds of teeth grinding together. And I backed away and almost fell down the attic ladder, stumbling onto the hallway floor and crawling backwards until I saw something at the end of the hall. Something shaped like a person but bent the wrong way, like its joints were reversed, and it was moving slowly toward me. Not walking, but dragging its hands and feet like it didn't know how legs worked. And I screamed and ran down the stairs, through the living room, back out into the sun where the heat hit me like a slap and the porch boards felt hot again. And I turned around and the door slammed behind me on its own. And I swear I heard Mark's voice say my name one more time, but it wasn't his voice anymore. It was deeper and wider, like a mouth too big for one person. And I got in the car and left, drove for hours without stopping. Didn't answer the phone for weeks until the sheriff called me to say they found the house completely empty. No furniture, no body. No sign anyone had been there for years. And when I insisted, they checked the title records and said no one named Mark ever inherited it. That it was foreclosed 5 years ago after the last owners went missing. And I even drove back once just to be sure, just to see if it was all in my head. But when I got to the spot on the map, the road didn't lead to a house, just an overgrown field with no driveway and no porch and no sign anything had ever been built there. And I know what I saw, I know what I touched. I still have the photos on my phone that I took inside. But every time I try to open them now the app crashes or they come up black, just black squares with timestamps. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I still hear Mark calling my name from another room, soft and fast and wrong. And when I go to check, there's never anyone there. Just the cold and that smell, the soil smell, getting stronger. Every day. Story 29. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would write something like this, let alone believe it. But what happened to me 3 years ago never left, never faded, never softened into memory. And I've reached the point where I either get it out or lose whatever's left of my grip on reality, because every time I close my eyes, I see that hallway again, I feel that thing watching me, and if I don't speak it aloud in some form, I swear I will disappear like the others, like the man before me who tried to understand it. So here is the truth as plainly as I can tell it. No embellishment, no fiction, only the story of what happened in apartment 6B. The one everyone pretends isn't there, even though the building is symmetrical and the mailboxes go from 6A to 6C with no gap in between. And the super, when asked, just shrugs and says it's a storage unit. But I know that's a lie because I lived in 6A for 6 months and I heard the sounds every night, soft at first, like shuffling feet or paper, being crumpled in the dark, but then they changed. They became deliberate, like someone pacing, someone breathing too close to the wall. And the worst part was how the sounds mimicked me, always a beat behind, like an echo that shouldn't exist. And I told myself it was just the building settling or the neighbors moving around. Until the night I stayed up late and tapped on the wall 3 times and heard 3 taps back, not echoing but answering, and when I laughed nervously and tapped twice more, the reply came slower, heavier, like a fist dragging across drywall, and I didn't sleep that night or the one after. And the next morning I asked the landlord directly who was in 6B, and he gave me a look I'll never forget, not fear, not confusion, but anger, like I had broken some rule by asking, like I had poked something that shouldn't be touched. And he said no one lives there, always has been storage, always will be. And then he walked away fast without looking back, and that was when I started digging, finding old tenant records, utility bills, anything I could get from public archives or a couple bribes to the night clerk at the management office. And I learned that apartment 6B used to exist. It was leased once, 22 years ago, to a man named Dennis Callow who vanished 3 weeks after moving in. Just disappeared, no forwarding address, no missing person report filed because he had no family, no job, no ties. Just one cardboard box of belongings and a journal they found later when they finally opened the door months afterward. And what was strange was that no one had reported a smell or anything. But when they opened the unit, it was empty, not cleaned out, just hollow, like even the dust had been wiped clean. And the journal was found in the middle of the room, open to a page that read, "The wall is listening now," in jagged black ink, and nothing else. Just that sentence over and over again until the pages ran out and the handwriting got worse. Further, it went like someone was writing in the dark or without looking. And after that, the apartment was quietly sealed and scrubbed from the system, but it's still there, behind that door with the rusted hinges and the chip paint. And I know it because the sounds got worse, louder, closer, until it wasn't just tapping but whispering, full sentences spoken too fast to understand, murmurs that came from under the floorboards or behind the kitchen sink. And sometimes I'd hear my name said in my own voice, and once, I swear, I heard my mother's voice calling me from inside the bathroom vent even though she died in 2012 and the funeral was closed casket because of the crash, and I started staying out late, coming home drunk just so I could sleep. But nothing dulled the feeling that someone or something was watching me, not from outside, but from inside the walls. And one night I woke up to the sound of the light bulbs in the hallway popping one by one, soft little explosions, marching toward my door, and I stood there, frozen, clutching a kitchen knife like that would help. And I swear I saw the knob turn on its own, just an inch, not enough to open, but enough to let me know it could. And the next day I installed a deadbolt, even though the lease forbade it, because screw the lease, something was in that apartment next door and it wanted in. Or maybe it wanted me to come in. And I tried to move out, but suddenly the paperwork stalled. The building manager stopped responding. My key card stopped working on the front door, but always worked on the basement. and I made the mistake of going down there to check the breakers and found another door labeled 6B, even though it made no sense. A steel door in the boiler room with no handle, just a keyhole, and from behind it came the sound of someone breathing, long and ragged, and then something that sounded like it spoke my full name in a perfect copy of my own voice, and I ran. Left the building and didn't go. Back for 3 days, slept in my car. But when I finally came back to grab my things, my door was open, even though I'd locked it with the deadbolt and the knob was still latched, like it had been bypassed entirely, and inside everything was rearranged, not ransacked, but carefully moved. Every object turned to face the wall we shared with 6B, including the chairs, the mirrors, even my cat, who I found sitting with her nose pressed against the baseboard, tail twitching violently, and she wouldn't move or eat for days after, just sat there staring. And that was the last night I ever slept there, because around 3 a.m. I heard scratching inside the mattress, not under it but inside. And when I cut it open with the knife, I found nothing but my own socks and t-shirts stuffed inside. No springs, no foam, just my belongings, like someone had gutted the bed and refilled it with pieces of me. And I ran again, this time without packing. Just grabbed my wallet and phone and left. And I've never been back, but I still hear it. I still feel it. That door in the basement with the breath behind it. And I found out later that others have tried to rent the unit since I left, but they never last, always leave within a week. And one girl wrote a blog post before deleting it that said, "The mirror showed me someone else brushing my teeth," and another said the water from the tap came out warm and red and smelled like meat. And even though no one mentions it out loud, if you Google the building name and dig deep enough, you'll find threads on forums with titles like "Apartment Beside the Absence" and "I lived next to the wall and it followed me," and every single one ends in silence, no replies, no follow-ups, like the author vanished too. And maybe I will. Maybe this is my way of warning whoever comes next that the thing behind the wall doesn't sleep, doesn't stop, doesn't forget. It only waits and listens and learns. And even now as I write this, I can hear it in the pipes, under the floor, breathing, patient, amused, and when the lights go out again, and they will, it will be closer than before. Story 30. I never used to believe people when they talked about haunted places, cursed houses, or strange disappearances, because I always figured there was a rational explanation behind everything. That ghosts and monsters were just projections of grief or fear or too many sleepless nights. But then I moved into that narrow brick duplex on Aldridge Street, a place that didn't look like anything special, just an old house split into two, with ivy crawling up the sides and the smell of mildew in the hallway. And I didn't question why the rent was so cheap or why the woman who showed me the place kept glancing over her shoulder like she was afraid someone was watching her from the attic window. Because I was desperate, recently unemployed and dealing with a breakup that had left me emotionally hollow and half-drunk most nights. So I signed the lease, paid the first month in cash, and moved in that weekend with only 2 suitcases and my cat Lynn, who seemed unusually nervous the moment we stepped inside, her tail puffed up and her head low like she could sense something I couldn't, and the first few nights were quiet enough. Though I couldn't help but notice a strange knocking sound from the walls, not like pipes or settling wood, but something deliberate, slow, and rhythmic, like someone tapping a single knuckle against the drywall every few hours, always in the same spot, behind the closet in the hallway. And when I finally got the courage to knock back, just once, half as a joke to myself, the knocking stopped for the rest of the night and didn't return until 3 nights later. Only this time it was louder, faster, like impatient fingers drumming just beneath the surface. And I tried to convince myself it was mice or raccoons or maybe even the neighbor. But when I asked him, an old man who lived in the other half of the duplex and rarely left his side of the porch, he just stared at me with this wide, too long expression before mumbling, "It doesn't like being acknowledged." And then he shut his door without another word. And from that moment, the atmosphere inside the house changed, grew heavier, colder, and I started noticing things that didn't make sense. My alarm clock would reset itself to 3:17 a.m. no matter when I went to bed. Food would spoil overnight even though the fridge was working fine. and Lynn stopped eating altogether. Just sat in the corner near the kitchen and stared at the ceiling with unblinking eyes that tracked something I couldn't see. And then there were the dreams, if you could call them that, because they didn't feel like dreams at all, more like memories from someone else's life bleeding into mine, filled with images of shadowed hallways, doorways filled with black static, and something crawling upside down along the ceiling, whispering my name in a voice that sounded just like mine but slower and filled with water, and I would wake drenched in sweat, heart hammering, and always at 3:17 a.m., and it was around this time that I started losing time, first just a few minutes here and there, but then whole hours, and once I came to while standing in the hallway closet, the one that shared a wall with the knocking, holding a box cutter in one hand and a photo I didn't recognize in the other, a photo of the house taken from the street with a figure barely visible in the upstairs window, except it wasn't me and it wasn't anyone I knew. And when I turned the photo over, written in tiny, scratchy pencil were the words, "Under the floor, under the breath, don't let it see you sleep." And I dropped the photo and backed away and found gouges in the closet floorboards, thin and deep like they'd been scraped by fingers or claws over years. And I ran to the basement to check the foundation, thinking maybe I could find an explanation, and what I found was worse. Behind the boiler, hidden behind an old sheet of plywood nailed to the brick, was a narrow crawlspace filled with dozens of empty picture frames, broken eyeglasses, and a single child's shoe, all coated in dust but arranged like some kind of shrine. And on the wall, someone had scratched the words "IT lives" in the walls, "Don't listen to it," over and over. The grooves deep and angry, like whoever wrote them didn't stop until their hands bled. And I stumbled back upstairs, locked the basement door, and tried to pack my things to leave, but my phone had no signal. The front door wouldn't unlock no matter how hard I turned the bolt, and the windows wouldn't open. And when I looked outside, the street was empty, not just quiet but totally abandoned. No cars, no neighbors, not even birds or the wind, just a silent, sunless gray that pressed against the glass like a fog with weight. And the walls began to pulse, I swear to God, like something behind them was breathing, slow and heavy, and I heard my own voice coming from inside the kitchen vent, asking me to let it out, saying it was cold and it missed being alive. And that night I locked myself in the bedroom, pushed the dresser in front of the door, and tried to sleep, but sleep didn't come, only whispers, so many whispers, overlapping and babbling like children talking over each other in reverse. And when I finally lost consciousness, I dreamed of a hallway that stretched forever, lined with mirrors that showed me as I would look after starving for weeks, sunken cheeks, torn clothes, eyes empty and black. And when I woke up, Lynn was gone, no sign of her anywhere, not even her collar, just 4 tiny paw prints on the windowsill leading to the inside of the wall. And I knew then I wasn't alone, hadn't been alone since the moment I stepped into the house, because something had been waiting, something old and cruel and clever, feeding off my fear, learning how to sound like me. And the last night was the worst, because I heard footsteps in the attic, then the basement, then the hallway, and when I turned off the lights to hide, I saw eyes, glowing faintly in the reflection of the television screen, not human eyes, too wide and glistening, and a shape crawling out from under the floorboards, pulling itself with long, thin fingers that made no noise even as they scraped the wood raw. And I passed out or blacked out or something, because I woke up outside, lying in the middle of Aldridge Street at dawn, clothes torn, hands bleeding, with no memory of how I got there. And when I looked back at the house, it was gone, just an empty lot, filled with weeds and broken fence posts. And when I asked the city what happened, they said no such house had existed on that block for at least 10 years, and the lot had been condemned after a fire in 1997. But I know it was real. I lived there. I have the scars and the nightmares and the echo of that voice still whispering in my ears, telling me it's still with me, that it followed me out, that it lives in the places I can't see, behind mirrors, under floorboards, and it's waiting again for me to sleep. And if I close my eyes too long, I'm afraid I'll wake up back in that hallway, or worse, not wake up at all. And sometimes when I look at my own reflection, I'm not entirely sure it's still me looking back. Story 31. I've never told anyone this before, and I'm not even sure I should now because saying it out loud feels like giving it shape again, like feeding it breath. But I have to get it out before I forget or before it takes whatever part of me still remembers that what happened wasn't just a dream or a breakdown or the side effect of stress and sleep deprivation, because it was real. And I know it was real because I still have the scars and the sleepless nights and the missing hours, and I still wake up at exactly 2:43 a.m. every single night without fail, sometimes with blood on my hands and sometimes with mud on my feet, but always with that same feeling in my chest, like I've come back from somewhere far deeper and darker than dreams should ever reach. And it all started the night I moved into my cousin's old place after he disappeared, not died, not moved, just vanished, like the earth swallowed him or he stepped into a crack between this world and something else, and no one would say it out loud, but everyone knew he wasn't coming back. And since I had no other place to go after losing my job and my apartment and most of what I called a life, I took the key from his mother and moved into the second-floor flat of that crooked 3-story house on Dunley Street, the one with the warped floorboards and the smell of rot coming from the vents, the one the neighbors crossed the street to avoid, the one kids dared each other to throw rocks at but never went near once the sun went down. And the first few days were quiet, unsettlingly quiet, like the whole house was holding its breath, and I chalked up the strange flickering lights and the cold spots in the hallway to old wiring and bad insulation. But then I found the notebook wedged behind the water heater in the basement, the one with the cracked black cover and the pages filled with frantic, looping handwriting that started out coherent and descended into symbols and desperate pleas and drawings of an arched doorway with something standing behind it that had too many arms and no face. And the last readable line before the gibberish took over said, "Do not sleep where the shadow crosses the wall at midnight." And I didn't know what that meant until the third night when I saw the shadow it was talking about, a thin black streak that moved across the living room wall around 12:07 a.m. every night, even though there was no light source to cast it. And I tried to ignore it at first, but every night after that the shadow grew darker, slower, and then it began to stretch toward the floor, and I started hearing scratching from inside the walls, not mice or rats, but something deliberate, clawed, and impatient, and I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear at first, but because the air in the apartment would turn thick and electric and buzz in my ears like there was a storm building just outside, and I'd lie there frozen as the scratching got louder, closer. And then one night I felt something crawl across my chest, cold and thin and weightless. But when I sat up gasping, there was nothing there except a trail of black ash on my shirt. And I ran to the mirror and saw a long scratch down my face that hadn't been there the day before. And that's when I started losing time. Waking up in different parts of the house with no memory of how I got there. The windows open, the door unlocked, my phone dead even though I hadn't used it. And one morning I found my shoes by the creek at the edge of town, caked in mud and reeds, but I had no memory of leaving. And the dreams got worse, always the same rotting staircase that spiraled downward forever, with whispers in a language I couldn't understand but felt like I almost could if I just kept listening. And every time I woke I'd have nosebleeds and scratches on my arms. And one night I saw something in the corner of my bedroom, not in the light but in the reflection on the window, something impossibly tall and thin with a head like a withered gourd and arms that bent the wrong way, and I blinked and it was gone. But the next morning all the mirrors in the house had cracked in a perfect ring like something had pressed its forehead to them from the inside, and the smell of rot was stronger, coming from the closet in the hallway where the light never worked and the air was always 10 degrees colder. And I started boarding it shut, but every time I turned away the hammer would be gone or the nails missing. And on the 7th night I woke up in the bathtub, soaked and shivering and surrounded by dead flies, and I realized I'd carved something into the tile with a broken piece of glass, rows of symbols from the notebook I never meant to memorize but somehow knew by heart. And it was then I accepted that whatever my cousin had found in that house hadn't left with him. It had stayed, watching, waiting, learning, and I wasn't just living in his old place, I was living in its place, and I started recording myself while I slept. And in the footage I never moved, never tossed or turned. But around 2:43 a.m. the picture would distort, the sound would fill with static, and a shape would appear by the foot of the bed, unmoving, hunched, almost human but not quite, and the camera would cut off. And I'd wake up screaming, throat raw, the same phrase carved into my skin over and over. The door is open, and I knew I had to leave, but every time I tried the engine wouldn't start, or I'd find my tires slashed, or the roads would be closed, and I saw people watching me from windows that didn't exist when I first moved in, and I stopped being able to distinguish dreams from waking because the same figures from my nightmares started appearing in the streets, staring from alleys, always still, always silent, and I stopped sleeping altogether. And then I found the second notebook, mine, the one I didn't remember writing, filled with dates and drawings and entries written in my own handwriting detailing things I hadn't done yet. Things like, he'll visit the basement again tonight, and the second crack will open beneath the bed, and then on the last page, once you finish this sentence, it begins, and I dropped the book and screamed, but the house didn't echo, the walls didn't shake. Nothing responded because it had already started, and the floor began to breathe, and the door behind the closet creaked open and revealed a hallway that shouldn't exist, filled with portraits of people I didn't know except they looked exactly like me, in different decades, different clothes, but always the same terrified expression. And I realized this thing, this presence, it didn't haunt a place, it haunted a person, and it had chosen me now. Or maybe I was just the next in a long line of people who found the door when they were weakest. And I write this now not to warn you, because it doesn't matter, because if you're reading this it's already too late, but because writing keeps it quiet for a little while. Keeps the scratching on the other side of the wall from becoming footsteps in the room. And maybe if I keep writing it won't drag me back into the staircase. Maybe I'll stay here in the light a little longer. Maybe I'll remember who I was before it took my voice, my time, my dreams, and replace them with echoes of other people it's devoured. And maybe if I never stop writing I can keep it asleep, but the pen is running dry, and the lights are flickering again, and the clock just turned 2:43. Story 32. I used to think fear was something simple, like a sudden jolt when a car swerves too close, or the tension you feel walking down a dark street alone at night, or maybe even the kind of low-grade anxiety that comes with bills and bad news and tight hallways. But what I didn't understand until last year is that real fear, the kind that doesn't leave, the kind that grows teeth and lives in your blood, is quiet, patient, and so much deeper than anything your body knows how to handle, and it started. For me the day I moved into the apartment above the old thrift store on Weller Street, a creaky, narrow place that smelled faintly like mothballs and old wood and had this tilted floor in the kitchen that made marbles roll into the same corner every time without fail. And I thought it was charming in a weird way, a kind of haunted charm I joked about with friends until I stopped joking altogether, because right away things were just slightly wrong, like the way my reflection would lag behind in the mirror for a split second if I moved too quickly, or how I'd wake up to find drawers open that I knew I'd closed, not in some dramatic horror movie way with everything thrown around, but just a quiet rearrangement. As if someone was looking through my things and trying not to be noticed, and at first I blamed myself, thought I was being forgetful, thought maybe the stress of a new job in a new city was messing with me, but that changed the night I heard the whispering, not from a neighbor or the walls or the street, but from inside my own bedroom closet, soft and clear and so familiar I almost answered it before realizing the voice whispering my name was my own, my exact voice, only slower, wetter, like it was speaking through water or thick oil. And I couldn't make out what it said except for, "Look behind you." And when I did there was nothing there except the feeling of something having just moved out of sight, and I barely slept that night, or any night after. Because every time I closed my eyes the same dream came, me standing in the thrift store below the apartment, except it wasn't the real thrift store. It was bigger, endless, and everything in it was burned or broken, and somewhere just out of sight something walked in the aisles, scraping its fingers across the shelves, whispering to itself in voices that sounded like people I knew, like my mother and my brother and my own voice layered together, asking me why I left the door open, why I invited it in, and I'd wake up gasping, soaked with sweat, and find dirt on my feet, fresh dirt, even though I hadn't left my bed. And then there were the lights, little flashes at night like cameras going off in the corners of rooms where there shouldn't be any light at all. Or the hallway light turning itself on at exactly 2:14 a.m. every night, without fail. And one night I stayed up to watch it, sitting silently on the floor with all the lights off and my phone in hand. And right at 2:14 it flickered on by itself. And I swear to God I saw something standing there just beyond the glow, tall and twisted like a marionette with broken strings, and it bent its head to the side like it was looking at me. And then the bulb exploded and I screamed so loud I didn't realize I was bleeding from my nose until I touched my face and my fingers came away red. And after that the apartment felt different, like the air had weight. Like I was underwater and everything moved slower, and the thrift store owner started acting strange too, watching me too closely, saying things like, "It gets hungry upstairs and don't let it hear you sleep," and then pretending he hadn't said anything when I asked him to repeat it. And I noticed my phone's voice recorder app kept turning on by itself in the middle of the night, recording these long hours of static with sudden sharp sounds buried in them. Sounds like breathing or a hand slapping tile or someone calling my name from very far away. And I tried moving out, tried breaking my lease. But every time I packed a box, something would disappear or something else would be added, like the time I found that box of teeth under my bed, all mismatched sizes, some clearly not human. Or the time I saw that the mirror in my bathroom didn't show the room behind me correctly, it was off by just a little, just enough to notice that there was something else in the reflection that wasn't in the room. Something small and hunched in the corner that twitched when I looked directly at it and vanished the second I turned around. And I started calling my friends less, stopped inviting anyone over, not because I didn't want company, but because the last time I had someone visit they left crying and refused to tell me why. Just said they felt watched the entire time. And I can't explain it, but I think that's what it wants, to be noticed, to be remembered. And it uses me like a mirror, like a voice, like a puppet. And sometimes I hear myself talking when I know I'm not speaking. I'll be sitting in silence and hear my own voice coming from another room saying things I don't understand, words that don't belong to any language I've heard before, and they leave a taste in my mouth like rust and soil and burned hair. And I started researching the building, looking for old articles, old tenants, anything, and I found out that the thrift store used to be a mortuary, and before that it was a home for the criminally insane, and before that it was a church, and every record I found ended in fire or death or disappearance, every single one, going back over a century, and I found names scratched into the underside of my floorboards, dozens of them, all written in different handwriting, and the last one was mine, even though I never wrote it there. And some nights I hear footsteps in the walls and the sound of nails tapping slowly from inside the closet, and my reflection now doesn't quite follow me, it hesitates, lags, smiles when I don't. And last week, I took a picture of myself, and there was someone else standing behind me in the photo, someone wearing my clothes but with no eyes and no mouth, just skin stretched tight and smooth where a face should be, and the photo corrupted a second later and my phone crashed. And I've tried burning sage, I've tried calling priests, I've tried sleeping with lights on, but nothing helps, nothing stops it, and now sometimes when I blink I see that endless thrift store again, rows and rows of broken things. And I know it's waiting for me to return, waiting for me to walk those aisles forever, and last night I dreamed of the door again, the one at the end of the hallway that doesn't exist in the real apartment, and I woke up standing in front of my bedroom closet, hand on the knob, heart pounding like a drum, and I know if I open it again it won't be a closet anymore, it'll be the other place, and I won't come back this time, and I'm writing this not to be saved, not to be believed, but to warn you, in case you ever hear a voice that sounds like your own asking to be let in, because once you answer, it learns how to wear you, and then all you are is a passenger in your own skin, watching from behind the glass as it lives your life better than you ever could. And someday someone will ask you what happened to the person who used to live in that apartment, and if you listen closely, you might hear me answering from the walls, from the mirrors, from somewhere just behind your thoughts.